What's the BPM? Got a massive podcast for you here with Pee Wee Ferris. Pee Wee is an absolute don of Australian dance music. I told him that nothing was off limits in the podcast and to talk about anything he wanted to, and he sure did that. So check it out, Pee Wee Ferris. Welcome to the What's the BPM? Bit of Aussie DJ and rave royalty. Pee Wee Ferris.
Hey, how you going, Steve? How are you?
Good, mate. Good. Mate, before we start, where's the name Pee Wee Ferris come from?
Well, it's actually my name, even though it's not my real name. It was a nickname I got when I was, two or three, because I have, six kids in the family. And when you're the youngest, you generally are the smallest. And someone said it, and the nickname just stuck, and everyone called it to me. It was just that was it, and that was my whole life was that name.
So
So
it's
it
just
wasn't a
a
stage name. It
nickname.
just happened. It
Nickname.
worked for me because I was like people remembered it for the good and bad. Like when I was a kid, I lived in America, and it wasn't cool to have a name called Peewee. It was just like an insult. So in America, I didn't actually use it when I was a kid because it's the connotations are like you're small, weak, a
Yeah.
bad, a notch down because that was always the little league, Peewee Little League. So
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
never considered. It was an insult if you were older if you got called that. So I didn't use it. But generally, when I came back from America as a kid, I was quite happy to use it again. Everybody at home called me that, so it's like, oh yeah, and it worked quite well as a stage name. You know.
I've always find it interesting with how people got their DJ names. I interviewed Barking Boy from Brisbane. Sure you
Mm.
remember him.
Yeah.
And he got his name because he was like biting people at a rave once.
Oh,
So they
really?
named him Barking Boy. I
Wow.
thought it was interesting, eh? Like you just said there, you went to America. What age did you go? So you're born in Sydney,
Yeah, yeah. Born in Northern Beaches,
and
and
then your family moved to America.
yeah, Dad went over there for work, and I got dragged along because I was the youngest. Some of the others came different times because they're a bit older. Um, so I was the only one that actually stayed the whole time, and that was when I was, what was I, 10, 11, 12, 13,
Oh,
14?
real young. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was that in between, primary and high school. So I sort of went to middle school over there and started high school in America for 2 years, and then came back and finished here. So it for me, we're going back to my musical background, obviously.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that was a very much molded me, I think, America, because we lived in San Francisco, and the access to music in America was 1,000 times greater than Australia because, firstly, the population and most music was made in America in those days. 90% of the popular music was in America. So they all toured America. Everybody, we have to break it in America. It was the main market in the world. Um, so you found as a kid, there was a thing called a college market, a college circuit. And it was all anybody could go, any age group, because it would be at like San Jose State or Stanford University. And you go to a gig, underage gig, and you go see any band that would turn up. And it was like at 8 o'clock at night. So my brother was older than me. And he'd say, okay, come on, let's go have a look. We're going to go watch XTC. So I go to see XTC. Next week, we go to see Talking Heads. Next week, we'd see Blondie. And there'd be 200 people there. And then you go see, like for me, what really interested me was a band called YMO, which was Yellow Magic Orchestra. And I saw them they were at Castro, and San Francisco is a big gay market there. So they had a lot of interesting bands come through. And YMO were the first electronic band I ever saw, and everything electronic, all synths. And I was just godsmacked going, how? You hear music, but you don't understand how it's made until you see a band like that. You go, even the drums were pads. And this is, really early days.
What
Um,
year would that have been?
that would have been 80.
1980. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, way back. Yep.
81. And I was a kid. And I'm going, what are they playing? and they all played they had a big rack of Roland. They were Roland sponsored. They had everything, System 100s and every amazing keyboard everybody wants now. They had everything. But they also had a drummer, but the drummer had pads. So he had his own electronic kit that they made. They had, like they were the Japanese version of Kraftwerk, but they were more techno pop. So they had really, for me, that even now, that was my main inspiration through my whole career. Sakamoto, Hosono, and Takahashi, they really inspired me because their sounds were different. Nobody else did it like that at that period. Everyone had the same keyboards, but they had something else. I don't know what it was. They were very much jazz musicians turned pop. So they were trained in mostly jazz, but and made Japanese pop music. So all the chords were electronic keyboards with jazz in a pop techno, so-called, in those days it was techno because it was electronic. And it was really experimental and different, but really commercial at the same time. So they had some songs were really popular and lots of melodies, and some were really avant-garde, and if you look back in their history and catalog, all the Detroit early DJs all played some of the early YMO stuff. B Unit, I don't know if you heard it by Hosono. No. It was like an underground Detroit track. And they all played it. It was really weird. Lots of samples. They were the first to use samplers. They were the first to use sequences in different ways, even though they don't get the credit for it because it was always somebody that started it,
Yeah. Yeah.
The history of the world is always determined by who has the most media.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not what isn't. Even whether they were or weren't the first. Kraftwerk were doing a lot before that, and Walter Carlos, and all these other people were doing stuff earlier, but they didn't really do popular music at the time. They tried, like with the model Kraftwerk. They didn't really jump into that pop market where YMO did in Japan. They were huge. They were really popular. So their music had a big range of music, from ambient, avant-garde, pop, weirdness. It was like and big anthems, really catchy melodies and chords. And even now, I listen to a lot of their old stuff and I go, "Gee, that's catchy." So many layers and so many hooks. You have, if anybody's listening, go back to the back.
I'm going to check it out after this.
And like everything, you'll probably listen and go, "Oh, it sounds a bit dated,"
Yeah.
But generally, dated is only determined by the sound of the drums, But some things don't; they survive forever, and that's why classical music survives forever, because it doesn't date, as much as dance music does. Because dance music is always evolving.
Yeah.
But that was a big inspiration for me musically, and that same period when in America you had bands like Talking Heads, and they had a guitarist called Adrian Belew. It was a guest guitarist, and Adrian Belew, I don't know if you heard him. He had this extremely weird electronic guitar sound that nobody could do. It was like really lots of backwards phasing. He do it live, and it was just odd. And as a kid, you go, "How's he doing that?" You hear it live. How's he making that sound? And it wasn't like the AC/DC, chord, big power chord. You could sort of imagine how they did it. These things, you couldn't imagine it. And there was no technology like we have now. Oh, yeah, we can generate this. It's easy to imagine it, right? Back then, you couldn't imagine how you did it, And then there's other people like David Sylvian that was doing a lot of ambient stuff with very similar to the Japanese market, but new wave. But then they have a horn section, a guy called John Hassel, and he would do the same weird effects on a horn, and it was a muted sound with ambient effects, and you wouldn't figure out how the hell he did it. And as a kid, you go, "How is he doing that?" And you'd always inspire. That to me really got my head going about music. It wasn't dance music. It was purely interesting music.
Just fascinated with it.
Yeah. And I was always a collector. from even a little kid. I'd listen to the radio and like all of us would record it. You know, you sort of had I had a love of ambient stuff way before I was a DJ. That's what my thing when I was growing up at school. I'd always listen to ambient music when I got home. I was an odd
No
one.
way.
Like I had everything, like I just put it on and do my study, listen to Eno and all the weirdness and all the new wave stuff. I never intended to be a DJ. It just so happened that a lot of these artists that were experimenting were also part of a wave of dance music experimentation because they were experimenting with samplers when they first came out and drum machines. So even though they came from different camps of, pop, electronic, ambient, they sort of already would look for interesting sounds. I mean, all these, when electro sound started, and the art of noise, all that early new wave experimental with drum machines and samples, they looked to all these other people. What were they doing with it? And then they'd change it. So they're all inspired each other. So you found there was a cross of popular music with experimental music with dance music, and it sort of gelled all together. And the drums and the samples, what got me involved, because I liked electronic sounds.
Yeah.
I was not into, even though I played it, the funky drummer, even though I loved it, I was more inspired by the electro sound of the funky drummer, even though I loved James Brown at the same time. But what really got me going was the electro. When that kicked in, I went, oh, yeah, this is the 808. When that kicked in, anything with a drum machine is like, yeah, I love this. But everybody hated it at the time. It was like a bad thing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Wasn't there like a real pushback from like music purists
Yeah,
saying,
they hated it.
Electronic drum machine, that's ridiculous.
They call it, they had no soul.
Yeah.
And drummers hated it because it was like, this is not real. It's too tight. But that's when I go back to this YMO sound. The drummer in YMO sounded like a drum machine.
Yeah.
He was that good.
That good, yeah.
So tight. You couldn't tell what was a drum machine, what wasn't. He was like spot on. And he played with the drum machine and you couldn't tell. There was no flamming, everything spot on. And I don't know if you know about, in those days, to sync equipment, with a SMPTE or a click track, it was really complicated and it was hard to put it all back in time. So you really had to listen to what was going on to get it in time. So I'm amazed you could even do it in those days properly, just hearing it, because there'd be delays and all this other stuff live. Yeah. It was quite hard to do. So, yeah, that was really inspirational for me before I even became a DJ. I was like really into sounds. I'd go to the record store at Anthem Records in Town Hall, and they used to import all the weird Japanese music. And they knew I was a sucker for it. So they'd give me all the Japanese pile because they'd get one of anything, only one. And I was a mega collector of Japanese pop and Japanese electro pop, they'd call it, and ambient. And so they'd just give it to me and I'd buy it. And that was when all this stuff started to really kick in, like Sakamoto, The Americans, Mr. Lawrence. They were mega hits then. But I was before that. I was on the new wave of new sounds, and then they got big popular after that.
Yeah.
You got to, sometimes when you're into music and sounds, you got to go where it's not cool, but it becomes cool. And that's, for me, that's someone who can really understand music, knowing which the direction is before it happens, before it's even written up. It's not cool, but I'm going to go that way. It takes a lot of risk
ahead of the game
that you have to overcome that. And you have to believe in what you think is right at the time. And that was music for me, taking a risk in those days. Like, I remember when I first started, I was one of the few that was playing more electronic music. In those days, it was all, even though it was drum machines, don't get me wrong, people will say, oh, it was all drum machines, all electronic. It was, the Stop Acton Waterman sound was around, in the early 80s. Right? It was all electronic, but they tried not to sound electronic. Even though it is sounding now, they still try to make it sound like a song. it wasn't experimental. It wasn't like pushing the limits. It was just like they still try to make it sound nice and poppy without being
Yeah.
weird, you know. But it was all electronic, and then they get a guitarist over the top of it to make it sound real, or a drummer over the top, just to make it sound a bit more live. But these other bands didn't bother. They just went, "Oh, it's electronic," and they
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
try to cover it. And this is a drum machine, and we're just going to have it up loud. You know, they're not trying to get a sound that sounds like a drummer, a snare that sounds like a drum. We're just going to use a clap that doesn't sound like one. So that was a bit of a difference. Even though, you know, when you look back at history, they'll say, "Oh, you know, Phil Collins used a drum machine, even though he's a drummer. You know, it started then. Blah, he had the first bell. You know, all this other stuff. You know, Herbie Hancock had the first Fairlight, whatever. You know, that was made in Australia. It's how you use the equipment that sounds electronic. You know, trying to copy something isn't electronic. It's just what they call now sample-based music.
Yeah.
You know, it's a sample, but it sounds like a normal, real instrument. They didn't call that back then. They just tried to copy it. All these old keyboards, like you know, when the Korg one came out and the DX1, DX7, they all try to make real sounds. It wasn't trying to make electronic sounds. They were trying to make a good electronic horn sound, so an artificial one. They were trying to make it sound real, and they never could do it. And people either loved it or hated it. The new wave people loved it, and they took it on, and all the rest of them, the rock band, hated it. They couldn't stand it, except for when, you know, like Van Halen came out with Jump. You know, it was all Oberheim keyboards, and you know, it was obviously this is a keyboard sound. They weren't
Yeah.
trying to hide the fact that it was a keyboard, and that works. But when you try to do a horn section like Stockak and Waterman, they were trying to copy a horn line that the Earth, Wind and Fire band would have done, but they do it badly because it doesn't sound the same. So it's a different headspace. You know, it's
Yeah.
like he's trying to write like a real like musician instead of, oh, who cares? It's a keyboard. Let's just play it like a keyboard. You know, so it's sort of a headspace thing. So that was really, for me, the technology really drove my direction. And if somehow I fell into DJing that way, because I hated what people were playing. I couldn't stand it. It was all like, you know, it was the disco era had gone, right? So it was all like the dance floor. It was in Sydney because Sydney had a mega gay market. It was like the birth of dance music, really, in my opinion, because it was already big,
Yeah.
you know, but it was not that cool. It was just big. You know, the gay scene was pretty. It wasn't interesting. It was just like Sylvester was still being played. Obviously, all the Dead or Alive were all being played, but it wasn't groundbreaking. It was just, you know, like pretty obvious high energy, I would call it. There was
Stuff
no,
that people knew.
what's that?
Stuff like songs that people already knew. Like nothing really sort of pushing the
Yeah,
boundaries.
it wasn't really trying to change the world. They were sort of like it's hard to describe back then because it was like the 70s. Disco only lasted, you know, 3 or 4 years, right? When you really look back on it, even
Yeah.
though they'll say it started early 70s, it didn't really get popular till 77, you know, until 79. That 3 years, and so much music came out, and then they in America tried to bag it out by, you know, disco sucks, and it worked, and it fell apart. Every major artist that was doing disco stopped, and they tried to do, you know, ballads, or they tried to do, you know, it was weird. It was a weird time. It changed dramatically because it was such a backlash that you found, you know, they went all different directions. The funk people still kept doing it, but it was not commercial anymore. So they went more underground, and that was now everyone plays that sound, you
Yeah.
know, that early 80s funk. Um, but it wasn't really that cool back then. And not many people here were playing it. But they at the gay market in Sydney, they kept it on that high energy level from the disco era. They never stopped in Sydney. It just kept getting bigger and bigger. So you found in Sydney, they weren't experimenting. It was just, that was the gay sound, yeah, Oxford Street sound. And, you know, it was great, but it wasn't really, for me as a individual, it wasn't breaking new grounds. It was like rehashing what was already there. And then until like, you know, Arthur Baker came along, and all these sort of interesting electronic guys, they started pushing the limits a bit more. And, obviously, everyone goes back to, the New Order sound. It was a little bit more alternative than just the classic gay disco sound. And that's when things started to change a bit. You had a cross of markets going on. With the in Sydney especially, the gay and straight weren't together at that point. But they
Yeah.
were so I remember the first club I opened, I wanted to just do I liked a bit of everything. As my background, I always liked a bit of lots of different music.
Sorry, did you just say the first club you opened?
Yeah, because I
Okay.
mean, I probably go back to that before. For some reason, I wanted to become a DJ, and I can't remember why. Whether it was just I wanted to. I got to a point where I taught myself at home.
And this is
Like,
like mid 80s. Are
yeah,
you
I was still at
around?
school, I think, at the time,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and I remember coming back from America, and I had one of those realistic mixers. I bought one from Radio Shack. A little baby one, and you could have multiple channels on it. Had a tape deck, and I had a really bad belt drive, and I taught myself how to mix. I'm not sure why I did. I'm not sure what inspired me, whether it was the radio stations over there that sometimes you'd hear it, or it was just purely. I think my main influence was when I first heard Grandmaster Flash. When was that? 1981. I think it must have been that 81 or 82. Where's the Steel? And I was like, how do they do that? And they're mixing, obviously all the hip hop DJs. That's when it was the birth of it. So that got
Scratching
me
and stuff.
inspired.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that record, it never goes away. It's always, top 10 for me, you know, and that probably made me learn how they doing all this stuff. Um, and I sort of started teaching myself how to do it. And not many people in Sydney could mix in those days. Actually, no, hardly any of them. Like, there was the only person who could mix, and I remember when I came along was Stephen Hawkins and Robert Rassick. They were the only ones that could mix. All the rest of them thought they could, but they were like they could try. They could never get it right. They all say they could now, but I remember going out all the time. They were terrible. They're terrible. They all say they were really good, but they'd mess it up. They were never consistent, and it was hard.
Yeah, I
It
was going to
was
say because
very
you didn't
difficult.
have the like Technics decks and that yet, did you? That
Oh, no, you never had the right equipment.
yeah,
No, 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 no. Everywhere you went, even when the first couple of gigs I had, most gigs had bad equipment. It was just you had to work with it.
yeah,
You had to figure it out, and you had to have that skill to go. Okay, how am I going to get this in? And you had to go with the flow.
yep,
So equipment was always a problem. It was the only place that I found it wasn't was I remember the first really big gig I got. I was a as it when I first I think I got a tryout at Hip Hop Club, which was in the city, turned into the Freezer and Mr. Goodbar. It's on Oxford Street. I got a fill-in job, and then I got a gig at a really big club called Jamison Street, and I was doing the ladies' night. Like on a Thursday night. They were the first club to have a really good DJ console. They had they didn't have 12, I think they had 1100s. And it was all on springs and it was really sleek. But no crossfade, of course. You had to just levels, but it was pretty good quality. So it was one of the first places you could actually get it right. And you had
yeah,
monitors, pretty good. It was like they'd spent a lot of money on it. And it was probably the first really big super club in Sydney. It was a big old tram warehouse, pretty big, and they used to have big nights there. And so you learn how to mix when you had to do a ladies' night, which
ladies' night.
because you had to play,
Yeah,
all the hits, leave your hat off, obviously all the Earth, Wind and Fires, Boogie Wonderland, all the big hits in a row.
yeah,
And when you're playing all that stuff as a DJ, the tempos never sit. They speed up dramatically. Within 32 bars, they will speed up 5 BPM. And you have to monitor it the whole way. Whoa, and you write it.
yeah.
You learn pretty quickly how to get it right. Or you didn't even bother. One or the other. A lot of people didn't bother.
Just
They
chop it
just
straight over.
they just drop it.
Yeah,
They cue it up and drop. Or they would no crossfader then drop.
yeah.
Um, and 90% of DJs probably would do that. They might somehow get a drum roll in, and drop the roll, but they didn't mix. So I came along and I went, well, I don't want to hear that. I just want to hear Grandmaster Flash. I want to mix it. So I started really, really mixing anything I could find, like at classical stuff over tracks. I remember using the Alleluia classical choir and throwing it over the top of all these tracks. And eventually, within the first couple of years, after doing it first, I opened my own club. And, this was a place called Spagos in City. And we, actually, no, before that, let's go back a bit, wind back. I had a couple of temporary gigs, fill-in gigs, I got ladies' night. And then I broke my neck. So I was out of action again straight away. I just got going and then I broke my neck. So I was out.
How'd you break your neck?
Skiing.
Oh,
so I went, oh, geez, what am I going to do now? And I had the equipment. And before even then, I'd already started working with reel to reel because I was a big fan of the mashup. This is in, the 80s. So, I was really inspired by Colcott and Steinsky when that first, lesson 1, 2, and 3 and all those mixes came out. I was really inspired. I thought, I've got to do that. So I started doing 4-track stuff, and then I broke my neck. So I went, what am I going to do? So I sat there in my room for 6 months teaching myself everything because I had nothing else to do. I had a brace on, I had traction. And I just sit there and learn to tape, edit, and properly, like I spent a lot of time because I had nothing else. And started doing remixes for myself, like extended versions because I was a big fan of that whole editing genre, which was really big in the clubs at the time. Latin Rascals, all the Jelly Bean used Latin Rascals and Shep Nunez. So I was a big fan of that sort of stuff. So I went, I can do this. So I started doing my own mixes. And then because I had some mates, Triple J, it was Double J, they went, that's really cool. Can I play it? So they'd play it on the radio. I do an extended odd mix of, Brothers Johnson, Stomp, and all these sort of classic disco stuff, but with good intros and outros and edit sections, chopped up. And then I do stutter chops, this, and it was pretty advanced. So you cut it up into 16th beats, cut it up, stick it all back together, and you put a start and an effect. And it's easy to do now. It was very hard back then. You had to measure it and, cut it up. And you had to get loops and cut it up. It was a long process.
You're actually sticking the tape back together.
Yeah.
Hey, that's
you had to record it, how many times, measure it to make sure it's the right length for each beat. And then if you did it by a 16th or an 8th or 4th, you'd have to cut it that length. So if you want to repeat it to kick drum, you have to put 4 little kick drums recorded in that length of tape, and you have to do it again. And you couldn't copy it like digital. You had to do it and do it and do it, do it. So if you did a minute edit section of kick snare with a cut up in between for 30 seconds, it would take hours and hours and hours to cut it up. So I learned how to do that. And that got into radio stuff. So I did a lot of radio. And that's how, once I got a bit of a name, all the clubs went, yeah, you can put a night on.
Yeah.
So I put a night on. And then I started playing, my version of what I consider dance music, which was more beats, less vocal. So was more like a drum machine, rhythms, less vocal. I'd always play the dub mix. Never play the original, or if I did, I'd cut it up, or I'd add to it, overdub it, whatever. I never hated playing the main version. I'd always look for the dub or the instrumental, and then I had 2 copies of everything, so I could just play the beginning and then chop to the next one for the end, And I never, even if I played any of the Oxford Street sounds like Mel and Kim, I'd always play the weird version. Never the original.
Yeah.
And all the people from the Oxford Street started going, that's pretty cool. We don't hear this up the road. And then I would throw in all sorts of music together. It wasn't just high energy, or it wasn't just funk. It was, a mixture.
Bit of
Or
everything.
yeah, and and you do a whole night, so you could play everything.
So
So
sorry, with your edits, did you get any of them like cut to vinyl?
I did it eventually. Then I got because I'd done a lot of the radio stuff, a lot of shows. Um, I did that first. It was called Holiday Rap. So I did an extended version for Holiday Rap, like a MC Michael G, and what was the other guy's name? So it was a rip off of Madonna's Holiday with a rap, and it was really, really popular, like big. It was like top 10 in Europe, and then so I did a cut up version for Australia, and they released it. So that was my first remix in what year was that? 86, 86. I think it was 86 or 87. I think it was 86. So that came out, and that's how I got into production. Because I did that, and then I started getting lots of remixes for all sorts of people. Some were, the first few were edits. Like I'd go into the studio, and they would say, "Okay, what do you need?" And they'd give me. I'd say, "I want that, that, that," and then I'd cut it up.
With like an engineer or something.
Well, at the first couple, they would just give me the whatever versions they had, and I'd try and cut them up to make a 12-inch. And then eventually I said, well, it'd be better if I could, have this version with the master. Can you have it without the vocals? Can I have this? And they said, well, why don't you just go in the studio and just do it? Tell us what you want. And I'd go in with an engineer, and they would go, well, I haven't got a clue how to use a 48-channel desk. And they'd put me in EMI Studios, which is a big studio. I go, okay, well, all right. So you'd have one day to do it. So I'd realize it was really hard to do it in one day, because you have to get all the parts, bounce it to 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, and then cut it up again. And it was like, gee, this is hard. How am I going to do this so quickly? You had to work really quickly.
Yeah.
And you had a 24-hour lockout. So I'd use 24-hour lockout, and I'd go at 7 a.m. I'd be out at 7 a.m. But you'd work all day, all night to get it done. And I went, after doing a few of those, I went, there must be a better way to do this. So you'd still only have one day in the studio, because it was expensive. It was like, $1,500 for a studio.
Oh, wow. Back in them days.
Then. And then you had to hire these engineer and the outboard equipment, and that was another 1,000 at least. So we're talking 2,000 to 3,000 just to do one day. That was back then.
Yeah.
So I'm going, well, to get the mix right, I need most of the day just to get the mix right, and then I can get the parts. So I'd have to do, you'd run off a instrumental, then you'd run off a dub version, then you'd run off a weirdness version with effects, then you'd run off another version, and then you'd splice it back together. So it's a big job, all on tape, and you had to do it there. So I went, how can I do this faster? So I figured out I could do it on the first digital stuff came out. It was one of the first on beta, a beta cassette. So you could record digitally onto the beta, and then I could take it home to my studio and do it on I bought a good quality reel-to-reel, and I could edit at home. So that allowed me to work longer on the track. I did all the parts one day, go home, edit them, and send it back again. And that was good, because I could just take a bit more time, and then I could overdub it if I wanted it. But it's still, it was limited. So then I started to go, well, how can I get this sounding better? Because in those days, nothing was in time. There was they didn't use drum machines for these mixes, right? Okay, so if you want to do a remix, and then I started, well, how do I fix the drums? Because they're I can EQ them. I can EQ them, but they're still bad drums. I want to change them. So then I went, okay, well, I got to work. I started at the same time. I got to use a computer. At that time, it was an MC500, so it was a portable one. They didn't have laptop ones or computer software that was good enough for those days. So I went, I can replace the drums. Let's get my drums right. But to get that, you spend half the day trying to sync it up to the drum machine, because it was out of time. I don't know if you know drummers, They do this, they go
Yeah, up and
tempo.
down. Yeah, all over
And
the
you'd
place.
spend, I
Yeah.
had to sit there and put a click on everything to try and get it back into time. And then you lock it into a SMPTE. And then you run a SMPTE box to your system to lock it. And that took, hours just to do that. So it was a big ordeal. They went, oh, there must be a better way to do this. And then I started getting the original artists in to go, oh, can you really do the drums? So I do a mix like Boom Crash Opera, and they were really friendly. Can you come in and redo the drums for me? So I get him back into the studio and play over it again. Can you redo the hi-hats with a house hi-hat? Because they didn't have a house beat. So I'd get them to redo it, and then I'd overdub it again. Stuff like that. And, that sort of coincided with all the club work at the same time. So you do experimental remixing with rock bands and then have dance music that was coming out of Chicago and obviously around the world at the same time. So it was a real mix mash of sounds at the time. It was good fun. There
Wow.
was lots of inspiration back then. Nothing stood still. It was not like, like for the last 15 years, music hasn't really moved on,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah.
It's still very similar formula. It's just become faster and cleaner if you want it to be. So you can do it a lot faster, a lot cleaner, easier, and you got more accessibility to everything. Where back then you had to. Can you imagine now, right? Like going to a remix, right? To do a remix of a track, you had to imagine in your head whether it would work because you couldn't audition it. There was no auditioning. So you would go, okay, I want to do a remix of Kate Savannah, right? For example, I'd do that. Okay, I know the song. I'd go, okay, I know the sort of beat I want to use. I want a more cooler bass line. You've got to play along with the original track, right? If you wanted to. But if you wanted to speed it up and do a remix and try it out, you couldn't do that. You'd have to do it and then speed it up. So you could only do that in the studio. So to do that, you had to be ready for that one day because you had 24 hours to do the mix. So can you imagine, it's a lot of money going into all these companies to go, okay, well, we're going to pay you this and we're going to pay for the studio. It's a big budget. You got to lock it in pretty
Yeah.
quickly. No pressure. Okay, you got one chance, you got one day. You got to get the bass right, everything right instantly. And you can't sit in the studio to sync up the vocals because there was no sampler. There was no digital workstation.
Yep.
You couldn't audition the vocals on the new mix. You could sit at home and get a drum pattern going and do all that stuff, but you couldn't actually play it with the remix vocals to make it say, oh, is that going to really work properly? You couldn't do anything like that. You have to wait till you got in the studio, till you got the 48 track or some of them bigger than that, till you lock it in. You go, oh yeah, that doesn't work. Okay, let's try it. You can't. You don't have that turnaround of going, oh, well, let's think about this. There was no time to think. You just go, okay. And a lot of people in those days, they would rely on really good players to come in and go, okay, can you play for me? Because they had the time restraints. But that cost money. So, for example, I did a session with a really big American star remixer called Mark Berry. He was a big knob in the late 80s with he did Sexomatic. I don't know if you know it, but he was a big, really well-known remixer. He's one of the first to use a really big drum sample, kick and snare. I don't know. You have to sort of look it up. So look up Mark Berry, Sexomatic, or there's all these songs that he remixed. And it was like a turning point for me anyway, of the sound of what a kick drum could be. It was the same time as what Trevor Horn was doing, but the Mark Berry one was much bigger and sounded phenomenal in a nightclub. And I got to work with him, and he was what classic American where they have a lot of money. They just get people in because they got a mega budget.
Yeah.
This is where the world changed. America, you go in like the disco days. They had huge budgets. You could pull in an orchestra. You could pull in the best session artists in the world, but everything costs a ton of money. So when you're in little Australia, no one has that sort of money. or you get a band that can play it, one or the other. But as a remixer, you were limited to by how much money you had to spend. You couldn't afford to get, a backing session. That's like, $600 there. Plus, you need a keyboard, so another 500, 400. And then suddenly you got all these people, and you're going, I can't afford that.
Just adds up. At least you were making money from selling the music, though, back
Yeah.
then.
No, well, but it's more the quality. It's what you're looking for. You had to sort of, and that's when the whole house music thing happened. It allowed people like me that didn't have the budget to somehow, I can build my own studio, or I can do it myself. It'll still cost me $100,000, but I could get into the market. Where before that, you need $1 million.
For $100,000. Holy shit. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you had to have like when I started doing my own stuff in my own studio, I would have, what do I have? I had a 32 channel Mackie, which is a high quality, cheap desk. It was a cheap desk, but it was still 10, 15 grand. That was a cheap one. Because it had to be quality, because you needed high quality. And you'd have to have all the keyboards running in time live. You couldn't record it. So you'd have to have everything running off the sequencer in live. So you had to leave everything on for, like, if you're doing a mix, right? I would leave them on for weeks, never turn anything off, because you get the sound right. Oh yeah, that's perfect. And you couldn't turn it off. You could save it, but it would never come back the same way. So you go, the mini mood the presets, they'd always change as you turned it on and off. I went, I'll just leave it on. Jeez. And so you'd hit replay and it record onto a DAT. And that's all you could do.
That's how you got it.
To have vocals, you had to sync up some sort of a digital audio. And you could do that, but they were limited to, when they first came out, 2 to 4 tracks, sometimes 8. And then that was when I had 8 tracks. I could put digital audio on it. Or you had a sampler that could hold, like, we'd have S1000 or 900s, and you'd have an extra RAM in the back, and you could get enough vocal just to do the choruses, So you ended up doing, I can't do that sort of mix because I haven't got the memory. Or you do the mix and then overdub it somewhere else, or you do another take. But it was tricky. So
sounds like so difficult.
You had to invest all the money to get it right.
Yeah.
But that was part of the world. Now looking back, I could have bought a house. All the music and all the equipment I bought.
Yep.
Now I don't need any of it.
Just need a computer. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't even need that anymore, really, do you can hire one.
Yeah.
But where were we?
So you were starting to make house music and doing all your remixing, and you said you bought a club, or you opened up a club night or something like that.
Yeah, well, I opened it because I was not happy with what people were playing. I went, this is really boring. I don't want to hear this sort of music. I don't want just fun. I don't want just disco. I don't want high energy. I want a bit of everything. So my club was like a bit of mesh from electro, beats, hip hop. It was a real mixture of house music, and it would be a real journey, big time. And it really kicked off. We'd get straight in gay market all night, and it was really experimental. It was like I was playing the weirdest music late. Even now, all the new or early acid house stuff with funk and hip hop.
Yeah.
So I play it all together, and it worked. Suddenly we went for this small club, and then it got really popular. Then we got there's a club called Sweatbox at Meltdown. Well, the Sweatbox was the party, and Sweatbox became really popular in Sydney. It was a little club in Potts Point, had about 200 people, but it was like the talk of the town. You couldn't get in.
200 capacity.
200, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yep.
We were like groundbreaking. Me and Stephen Hawkins were DJs, and we really pushed the limits. And that was when I first started taking my sampler out into the club. So I'd bring a sampler with me, and I'd play old music. I've said this before in a couple of stories. I used to do like place. They had a 4-second sampler. You could have 4 different samples. So you could have 1 second for each one, or you could have 4 seconds. So I'd have a kick drum and a sample or whatever on the machine, and I'd have a foot pedal where I could trigger the sample. So I'd have my hands on the decks, and then I'd play something like Aretha Franklin, Respect, and I'd slam it over the top of Pump Up the Mars, Pump Up the Volume, because they had a lot of samples. I'd go from that into Respect by itself and to drop out Mars, Pump Up the Volume. But then I had my foot doing a kick drum. So to keep the intensity, I would be banging the kick drum and mixing with it. So I'd be doing this.
So everyone kept dancing.
And it was hilarious because there I am using my feet and my hands. And then I'd mix back in again. And I do that with quite a few tracks. So I do that with, Jackson 5, really sort of eclectic, old and popular, but then with real underground at the same time. So in those days, the whole sample thing was coming in, and it was really interesting to hear a sample of a big classic for a short period. And as you saw what happened with the Italian house market, they all used that later on. And that was like a thing that started with the, all the Steinsky and the hip hop guys. That was influenced them to do it with house music. But I started doing it live, because I said, why don't I just do my own thing? And started doing that. And then that got really popular. Sorry, I'm moving around a bit here. And then the club got so big. We went from a 200-person club every week to doing parties for 5,000 within a year. That's how big it got really quickly.
Yep.
And suddenly this party thing, from being small underground, that it was a new alternative sound, that wasn't just pop, wasn't just rock, it wasn't just this. It was a mixture of acid house, hip hop, soul, a really mixture bag of music. And then we went into the Hordern Pavilion from that really quickly. Within 6 months, a year, it was got mega. It really quickly
exploded.
And mainly because, I put it down to me in a sense that I would push music that no one had. Like I would be the only person there at the beginning of when the shipments came in. I get the one copy of a track, I remember one of the big tracks I had was Back to the Scene of the Crime by Mr. Freeze, which was an Arthur Baker thing. I got a copy of it and I loved it, because it was a mixture between house, Philadelphia, disco, obviously electronic beats, and, a bit of classic this, and a rap over the top of it. So for me, it was perfect, it was like, had everything. And, it was a rip-off of that Philadelphia sound, the tune if you heard it. But it didn't matter. And I had the only copy. Nobody else did. And I flogged it for 6 months. And nobody could hear it. No, not even the radio stations had it. So they'd have to come to me. So I was like, if we want to hear that track, you had to come out.
Yeah, got to go see you.
That was not just the one track. I would do that with lots of other tracks as well.
Yep.
So I had all this music that nobody had, because they'd hear me play and go, could we order it? And they wouldn't know the song. They wouldn't know what it was called. And they'd go back to the record show, and the record shop would say, what is that track you're playing? Everyone's asking for it. And I'd eventually tell them, wait a little while. And they'd try and order it, and it would take 3 months to get back. So you couldn't order it. You'd have to wait.
By the time they got it, you were like onto the next thing.
Yeah, and it was huge. Yeah. So suddenly you hear all these people say, I used to play, that track back then, whether it was the Todd Terry one or whether it was this. When Todd Terry came out with Day in the Life, I flogged it. Nobody had it. It was on that Warlock label. And nobody wanted to play it. But I loved it, that whole sample, stab house, acid house period. And that was the sound for me for the Hordern. That sound that, I loved. I pushed that big time. It was like my sound. People go back and go, oh, yeah, I used to play that. It's like, yeah, but they didn't play for a year or two after it already kicked in. Everyone rewrites history, and you got to take a risk. Like if first time you heard Day in Life, you'd probably go, that won't work. That's not going to work. But they didn't have the power of, the crowd. They wanted something new at that period. They wanted to express in a different way. And the music did it for them. Like I remember playing middle of the night, Reese, Just Another Chance, which was like a really weird track Look it up. Reese, just another chance, and it's just a subsonic. They call it. That's where the Reese bass sound comes from. If you ever any producers out there, the Reese, when you see the Reese sample, because everything's called a Reese sound. It's like a drone, just a drone. This track was the first, and that's all it did. It just had a drone, and with a vocal whispering, and that was it. And it was huge. And you play that, and this is in 87, 80, and the crowd was like going nuts. You couldn't even play it now. It was like, just blow their heads off. You know,
so that period of time was drugs starting to show up in Sydney? Or
well, I was weird because didn't have a clue. I was so caught up with the music that I just thought I was that great, you know. But everyone says, yeah, it was. But for me, I was drinking soft drink, and they'd try and spike my Coke, you know, and because it was so busy, I could never get to the bar to get my Coca-Cola. They'd bring over a Coca-Cola and put scotch in it. I'm going, thanks, guys. You know, I didn't really want this, you know. And you'd work all night. I just like Coca-Cola. I just, that was me. But, they all say, the summer of love, which it was, that period, that 80, 87, 88, 89, and it just exploded musically. And Sydney was, without a doubt, it was the center of the world for dance music.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about that especially the Hordern Pavilion always comes up when you're looking at the history and how huge it was.
I mean, see, people didn't understand it because the magazines like NME and DJ Mag and all these other ones, all the writers were based in London.
Yeah.
Right. So all the stories came out of London. And so they just made up stuff that this is the biggest thing, which, they were right for a lot of things, but they always said they started everything. It was always like, the acid house started in London. It didn't start in London. They'll give credit to Chicago and Detroit, but they'll say we invented it really. It was us that pushed it. It wasn't. It was just they pushed it on their magazine, and that's why they say they do it. Their market and their magazine pushed it, so they invented that, but they didn't push the DJs to play it. It was just like people like me would push it, and the market went, wow, we haven't heard this before. We can't get this on the radio.
Yeah.
What is it? We would have to go going out, and they would go out to hear it. And sure, they wanted to hear, Michael Jackson in between, but that was party. That was what party was all about. You'd play, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. This is the early days. And then you'd mix in house music. So you'd always have a journey of different styles and move around. It wasn't just, this is an acid house night. This is a hip hop night. There was none of that. Just forget that. It wasn't part
everything.
of it.
Yeah.
Everything was a journey. And even at the Hordern, in the middle of the night when Soul to Soul was big, I would drop to Soul to Soul 97 beats a minute in the middle of the night. And they loved it. It was like 5,000 people going off to Soul. People would be scared to play it at a bar gig now.
Yeah.
Going, I better not play that, a bit slow.
Empty the dance floor.
Yeah, I mean, but Sydney was different because we came from a really good, obviously a gay capital of music. And so they had already been exposed to lots of good parties, from the gay market. So they already knew how to party. It wasn't something we taught them. They already knew how to party. They just needed someone to push the music boundaries.
Yeah.
So we already had the market. They just didn't have the music market. And then when the music caught up to something incredible, in my opinion, it changed. And so suddenly had all these people that loved to dance and knew how to dance, wanted to experiment with new music. Oh, this is different. Todd Terry all night long, house music all night long. Yeah, we love this. Where before it was always, really screaming anthems like Diana Ross, Shaka Khan, big mega dance hits.
Yeah.
It was never underground. So that's why the Hordern it got so big because suddenly you got all these inner city people and game market all mixed together, and it was safe. It was a really safe market. Like where in those days, you'd have all these venues around Sydney and even the rest of the country where they were rock gigs, or and it notoriously all these places. By the end of the night, there was a fight. Always.
Of
It was
course.
never not a fight. And the security was heavy. It was always a fight. That was part of life. You go out, you get a fight, have a fight. Where the dance market was the opposite. It was always friendly. Everyone's happy, considerate. It was never fights, never. You do thousands of people, no one fought. It was only until the rock crowd started to push in that got a bit more violent.
I was just going to say, like now it's done a full 180. Like all those people that used to be gone and now involved in.
They felt like they were missing out. They had the FOMO. They were, what was this dance music? We hate him. They would just be, and that's why there was such a reaction against, the bashing, because they just, in those days, they didn't gel very well, the rock crowd. It only took a bit longer for them to get into it. And that's when the rave scene started to happen. They sort of caught on to that a bit later on.
Yeah. The
inner city already had the parties. And then after they got shut down, because the council didn't like people walking around the streets at 7 a.m., they thought the residents started to shut anything down that was annoying, So it all changed. It always does every couple of years. But
sorry, but that Hordern Pavilion sort of era, apart from yourself, was there anyone else that was really pushing like new cutting edge music at that time?
Cutting edge, I would have thought Robert Russick. He would push the boundaries a bit more, and Stephen, we all pushed it. They were more, because they came from a gay market, they would always turn to the Queen side of music, the big divas. When everything failed, they'd go for the big vocal, where I was the opposite. I would go more for the beats and the noises than the vocal side, even though, you end up playing a bit of everything. We all sort of started to influence each other. Eventually, we all started to benefit off each other. I'd play more, they'd play more what I played. And you found a lot of the DJs, everybody got influenced that way. They'd go out to hear me do a 5-hour set. They always came back and went, oh, I can play some of that now. And, it's not really everyone got influenced by it. Like a big track like The Party was a good example. Craze. I had only copied for 6 months again. That was one of those tracks. And I flogged it. And it became a mega anthem for me. And then the Hordern came, and it was a huge anthem for that. And every DJ played it. So you found, they couldn't put me on every gig. They had to have other DJs as well.
Yeah.
So they would have me on, but everybody else started playing. And then everyone started to have a little bit of their own sound in that context. Like, for example, one of the big promoters, Jackie O, he would play more Manchester style of electronica. So he'd have a bit more of that. Some parties were more that way. And then others would have more Oxford Street sounding high energy in it. But they still had the dominant middle section would have been the Hordern sound, which is the Todd Terry house music, or like long sound, in my opinion. I would have thought the sound of that period would have been, like This Is Acid, that hip hop, hip house, all that sort of piano-y stab house. That would have been the Hordern sound, with big gay anthems as well, big mega vocal anthems. But so everybody had a bit of work. Let's put it that way. There's a party on every week nearly.
Yeah.
So, I did so many parties there, more than anybody else. But then if I was away doing another gig somewhere in the interstate, they had to get somebody else, so that someone else would do it. So there was my brothers did quite a few. Andy Glitcher, he was playing funky stuff. He'd play funk. So there were a lot of other DJs. It was trying to be a little bit different. They try to mix up a little bit, but because we had the main store, Stephen Hawkins had the main club at the time. We got more of the work because of that reason. Because we were there every week pushing this new music, and everybody else was really following because we had such a push, a sort of dominance. Even though it was only small, it's weird that way, but we did. And then we do the big parties. And they had to follow that. You can't not follow it. It's like now, you got a big market. When it works, you have to follow it.
Yeah.
You can't avoid it. You can be stubborn unless you hate it and you won't play it. Eventually, you get affected by it in some way, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I can play a bit of that.
Isn't that's so true? Because every sort of like trend now in dance music, all the main producers all kind of just lean that way until the wave passes and then they go back to their kind of, like
Yeah,
with electro house. I don't know if you remember that era.
yeah,
Everyone was making electro house music. And then when that phase died out, they went back to sort of just doing house, and
yeah, exactly.
you got to stay in the market. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, you do. I mean, that it's harder now, and in that sense, because the the wave of variety slowed down once that electro house started. That after that 2000 period, to me the electro house sort of killed a lot of music for me. It didn't develop fast enough. It was just a lot of bad electro.
Yeah.
Put a noisy bass line. There was electro. There wasn't the depth and the music quality, and that it didn't allow. That's also when the American media market went EDM, and they started to label and typecast people a little bit more than they used to. Before that, you could move a bit and get away with it. But then that American thing is, oh, you're a rave DJ, oh, you're a trance DJ. That started to kick in, and that sort of killed music in a lot of ways without having that variety. That suddenly you've got a big DJ like you saw a good example would be Carl Cox, right? Carl started like me. He was play everything. He was carefree about. He liked hip hop. He liked
Yeah.
this, that. He moved with the times. If it was really good, you move with it. If it was bad, you don't go there, right?
Yeah.
It's that
Yep.
simple. It's not a complicated thing. It's just whether it's good or bad. If this is good, even though it's not me, I really like it. I'm going to go that way. It's not premeditated. Oh, I better put out a track like this. It's like, oh, someone did that Rave track. That's really good. I really like that. Yeah, and now I'll play more. And there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Suddenly you got
Yep.
enough to go, I'm going to go that way. Suddenly people were saying, well, you're in the 2000 period. Suddenly, you get at that point, rave was nearly a dirty word
Yeah.
in Europe. It sort of changed. Australia, we didn't have that problem as much, because we had big clubs pushing like Sublime. We were already powering, and didn't have that problem of what rave was a bad word. We
Yeah.
we embraced it more so. Where in Europe, they got a bit scared. They didn't like. I don't think the clubs liked it too much. They didn't have that warehouse thing like we did. And so you found like people like Carl got scared of being labeled as a rave DJ, and he's only been turned into, well, I'm a house DJ more so, even though he's always been everything. It's not, he's one of the few that just does what he wants. But the media put it onto you. Just even with me, the media put it onto you. You're a rave DJ, or I am, or you're a trance DJ. They don't forget about, there I was doing a rave set, at Minto or Liverpool or somewhere, big rave warehouse somewhere in unknown warehouse somewhere. And then you come back and do a club gig and play garage. You only get remembered for what's the biggest promoter that pushes it. If you like Sublime, it was so big that I'm a hard trance DJ because it was so big.
That's just what I was going to say. I was going to say, I guarantee that most people who thinks of Pee Wee Ferris thinks of like, kind of the more hard dance sort of stuff that you would have
Yeah,
been playing in the late 90s,
yeah,
2000s.
exactly.
But you've
The early
really
trance,
been doing
the Gate
everything.
Crusher sound,
Yeah.
all these super clubs, and that labeling, that's where it started. The labeling of the super club, where it became not the DJ and the artist, it became the brand. That was the sort of the defining factor in what's happened in the last 20 years. Because the branding took over and it changed the way we look at music. We didn't look at music as an individual. What a great piece of music. It was the branding of this is that style of music or
Yep.
that. This is this market music. Like the Cafe Del Mar. oh, that's covered in style. It's not, oh, yeah, that's Portishead. Isn't that a great track? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
you
hundred
know,
percent.
you know what I mean? It was like that's when it all started to go pear shaped from a musical point of view, from a music lover like myself. You started to go, well, this is no better than what I've already got. Why or I don't want to play this? It's not very good. I know people like it, but their marketing's like it. It's not very good music.
Yeah,
And that period, it didn't really, that early 2000, when we were still banging, hard trance, it's on one level, the trance market got harder and harder. And I didn't like it going that hard, but they all did. But I liked more techno. But the problem is the techno market didn't really kick in as much. So you found the market went up to the hard trance, the hard trance, which
yeah,
was a bit hard for me, but it was, you go with it a little bit. And then you had the actually other way where the house crowd didn't want to be associated with that. And the hip hop market had already got rid of all of this way before that in
yeah,
the early 90s. They didn't want to be associated with anything to do with us. And I put that back on to these periods where there was one period where when the Belgium sound hit, I was playing a mixture before that of hip hop, hip house music, acid house, all together. And you could get away with it, because everyone liked a bit of everything until the Belgium sound happened and the gangster thing happened. And that split the market in half because suddenly you got all the people that were on the fence. Either they didn't like the Belgium sound, it was too hard, and ravey or techno, and the hip hop guys, they didn't want party anymore. They'd got over the party music. I don't know. That's where the violence started to kick in, when the gangster and they split the market up. And
yeah. Okay.
it damaged, Sydney got damaged big time by that. I was like, it didn't help anybody. And you've seen that over and over and through history of what that happens. And now it's just all like you've got Disneyland promoting events now. It's not, that's what it is now.
Yeah, it's corporate. Yeah.
It's corporate, it's promoted to the masses. It's not about what's good and bad music. It's just what looks good on a visual. It's really not an art in that sense anymore. It's a marketing, it's advertising.
Yeah.
It's no different. There's good and bad, without a doubt. I'm not being negative on the music, but you have to look for it. Just like we did when I first started. You had to look for the good music and then find a niche that is really experimental or something different. You go, wow, that's really cool. Move on with it. But, it's hard on that one. It's the accessibility is making life hard. People can get anything. So yeah. I like people like Carl. Don't get me wrong. Carl's one of my all-time favorite because I like the fact that he knows that. So he just plays his own stuff. That's not released. It's not released. Yep. So, you can't buy it. You got to go see Carl Cox. Why not? Why do you want to know? That's why you got to see him. You want to hear something new.
Yeah, exactly.
Artists doing that or DJs doing their own, something cool that's different. That's not just, accessible to everybody. It makes people to go out to go, I want to hear something new in a different way. Doesn't have to be dance music. It can be anything.
Mate, I wanted to talk about your mix CDs.
Yeah.
I had some of the earlier ones. I had one that I've been actually searching for. You can buy it on Discogs, but it's not online anywhere. I can't even think what it was called, but you started off with it was like, y'all ready to play the game?
Oh, yeah. That was DJs Down Under, I think the first one.
Like 97, 98 or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was the one that I put out on Reaching Records. I think that was that one. That was probably the very first sort of harder CD I put out. Pretty sure. We put a few mixtapes out before that. So we had a few mixtapes were pretty big in those days. Illegal, just buying the record shop.
Yeah. They were big up here in Brisbane, in the record shops. All the local big DJs had their own mixtapes on the wall.
Yeah.
So I can imagine you sold shitloads of them.
Yeah, but see, you obviously only had a limited run because you weren't allowed to do that.
Yeah.
But this was the first, I think, official, more of a rave one that was legal, and it was a proper release.
Yep.
And yeah, so I sort of tried to make it like a live set. So I put a lot of overdubs on it, and yeah, it was like me live, really. And I think it was called a live, wasn't it? It was a live. I think it was DJ Underground. I have to check.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up afterwards. But I
DJ's
have
down.
looked
I
it
know
up.
there's DJs down under, but I have to look. But it was the one with the laser.
Yeah, but so
Yeah.
you were making those mix CDs, and then so you'd release the mix CD and then tour the CD around the country,
Yeah.
and that really blew up. Like me and Greg DJ'd with you on a couple of those promotional tours on the sunny coast. But you the mix CDs were hugely popular.
Mm.
But you had like a court case that happened with like. Do you want to explain that? Like, what happened with that?
Well, you have to go back in the history. When you work, I had a lot of releases, music releases with Sony Music, and they were hugely popular. Big top 40 stuff. Sorry, there's some water. They it's sort of like it's easier to explain now than it was then, because
Yeah,
if you look at the history of Sony Music, and it's been very much publicly known now, that the head CEO, Dennis Hanlon, who is an awful person, and I'm not afraid to tell anybody now, and it's been proven he's an awful person. He was, extorting, blackmailing, pressuring, abusing his staff, and he did that with his artists too. And everybody was scared of him, because once you did it, you got blacklisted.
yeah, and that's it.
So
You buried you.
they bury you. They were like, the Sony attitude was like, we own you, we're going to do anything we want. But the minute you walk away, like I did, you go, well, you're not giving me anything. I'm just going to put it out with somebody else. It wasn't like I went, I'm not going to use you. It was more like, well, I put out a compilation with them and I would make nothing. I'd get a fee and they would make a ton of money. I go, and then so someone offered me, well, we'll give you a percentage per sales, and you get good money. What are you going to do? You're going to go, well, gives you a better opportunity, right? So I did that. The record company, this company put out probably 10 CDs with different artists, including, Nick Fish, Paul Holland, Jumpy Jack, Kate Munro, a few of the others, like lots of CDs. Eventually, it was getting to a point where the major companies like Sony Music were going, well, we don't like this guy. We think he's not clearing the music. It's like a classic, pressure to cut your competition attitude. So that happened at the same time as the whole digital revolution of Napster, LimeWire, where people were getting free music and not paying for it. So there was a big uproar about copyright with Napster, especially, where they took Sony and all the majors took them to try to block them because they were losing money, which fair enough,
Yeah.
You can't get it for free. I'm all for it. But it was what they did is they started a public campaign to stop this, as well as legal proceedings. So they wanted to get the media to get the public on side to change the policy of people trying to download LimeWire or Napster for free, because you have to work on a different level. You can't just take them to court every time, because they're just going to get another company to do it, right? So what they did is they started to home out ways they can create an image of this is bad. So what happened is, after doing these compilations, when I was asked to do it, I always checked the legal department of making sure there was a copy for every release that I asked for that was cleared from their company. So I got the documents to prove that they had licensed the tracks.
Yeah.
Right. So I always check that. Whether you can only check so far, because it's not my money. I was not my company. They give you the document. That's all you can get, right? You can't, get a private investigator to check everything. It was no online like you can now. There's no one that you can just suddenly check, and you have to ask and look, and then the only option is to take them to court to check, but you can't. You have to.
Yeah. Well, they just say, look, do you want to do it or not?
Yeah,
Take it or leave it. Yeah.
As an artist, it's not it's always the record company, the person releasing the music, responsibility to clear music, right? That was in my contract, in everyone's contract. Anybody who is a record company is responsible for what they put out, not the artist. So even though like an artist like, the Avalanches, for example, that had thousands of samples on their tracks, even though they're responsible for the samples, the record company are ultimately responsible for putting it out. So they had to tell the Avalanches, either you clear them or we will. But if you don't, we're responsible. So the Avalanche record company are responsible. Or the art, but if they're the artist and they're the company, then they're liable, right? Because they're the company. But if you're not the company, you're the artist, and you say, well, it's your responsibility. It's their responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened after this whole releases of compilations? The record company got annoyed at all these DJs going, well, we're going to go with other people and make money. So one day they decided to make an example of all of us, not just me, all the big knobs. And so they all took us to court, all of us. They filed, this is their tactics. I was at a fundraiser on a Friday night in Sydney, at Paddington, doing a kids function, making money for the children. They somehow found out I was there. They served me federal documents at a fundraiser on a Friday night to appear in court on Monday morning at 9 a.m. on a Friday night in federal. They had to appear on the Monday without I couldn't go to a lawyer in between Friday night and Monday to even go to a case about a copyright infringement. That's how dirty they become. And they get away.
They did that on the Friday night knowing that you wouldn't be able to get a lawyer.
You have to go out on a Monday morning. Yep. So basically, just to go into any legal department with federal, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they pulled us all in. Nick Fish, Jumpy Jack, Kate Munro, Paul Hall, and a few others. And we all go, what do we do? What do we do? And so, well, it's the record company's responsibility. So they got them as well. But we as artists are not responsible. We were just being signed up to do the mix and get a cut.
You're thinking, I'm just the DJ. I'm not worried. Yeah.
They didn't care. Sony ganged up with all major companies and decided, well, let's just take them anyway. We can prove it. They're part of the company because they're getting a cut. It's like every director, every shareholder of every company gets a cut of the profit, right? They're not responsible for the legal department. You know what I mean? So anyways, this is like a crazy idea, but legally they can get away with it. So they did it. And, we're going, what do we do? We can't afford this. It's like, we don't have that sort of money. And so the company had to front up, put out the music. And, things you learn after the fact, which I didn't know at the time, is if on the first day, very first day of court, if you don't audition your original documents on that day, you can't add them to evidence later on. So all my documents to prove that I had the documents to prove I didn't do anything. Yeah. I could not add them into the, there's a word they use. I forgot now. It's discovery or something.
Yeah.
I could not add them later on. Get that for you. And I'm going, well, why not? Oh, well, you have to do it then. Well, how would I know that? I know I should have had legal advice. But at that point, for the first day, the companies were responsible for it. Not my case, it's the company's case. But they dragged us into it. So suddenly we all got pulled into this case that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, like millions of dollars, And we go, we can't afford this. We can't do it. And one by one, the major companies locked off each DJ. Oh, we don't need Kate Munro. You're a nice person. We like Kate. She's part of the case. Yeah, we like Kate. We're not gonna sue Kate. Oh, we're not gonna sue Paul. We'll chuck them out. We're not gonna sue Nick. And they still wanted a scapegoat, to publicity. So they wouldn't let me out. So they just went for me.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't stop. And they knew that they could get publicity out of it. And they did, And they, I couldn't prove my innocence. It was impossible. and I couldn't afford to fight it because it was like up to 800,000 at that point. And I'm going, well, so what do? You just get pulled into it, and you go, you just got to take it. There's nothing you can do. And everyone thought, oh yeah, well they're in their right to do that. I said, well, no, Dennis is a complete utter, what? He's corrupt, he's a criminal. And they were, no, he's not. He made Australian music. Well, funny that how what happened years later, it showed that he's how much he abused and insulted and took advantage of people, and he lost his job and got fired. But for all the bad stuff he did, like to people like me, and there's lots of other artists had the same problem. Some of them just didn't talk about it because they got blacklisted. He got away with it.
Yeah.
And that's how they work. They're like disgusting, and that was that period. I stopped putting music out because I hated what the industry had become. I should have realized when I first heard that they were suing Michael Jackson, because Michael found out that he was losing a small cut of everything around the territories, and Sony were taking the money and not telling him, and he fought them, but he couldn't win because he had so much power.
Oh, you just
in the courts.
Pointless. Yeah.
And Michael Jackson had so much money to fight, even he couldn't win. I should have learned my lesson then. I should have just trying to got it, and not get caught up. But I still think, even if I did have, looking back now, even if I had really good lawyers, I still wouldn't have made it.
You wouldn't have won. Yeah.
I wouldn't have won.
You'd have needed like 10. You'd have needed a team of lawyers.
They know the loopholes. They knew all the loopholes, and they just, it's like, it's different when you go to a small claims to a big claims. It's really different, and then you need the QCs of the world. It's I was inexperienced at that point, and when you're innocent, you think, well, what do I need to do this? Because but then you realize later on, well, innocent doesn't mean anything.
Oh yeah,
you still get done for hundreds of thousands of dollars, in costs afterwards. And I got to front the money, but that it's just that's how they worked. And they all said to me afterwards, oh, we really feel bad about this. All the companies, all the ones that signed up.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
Universal, all the rest of them went, oh, we didn't really want you to go down, but we couldn't stop Sony doing it. We couldn't stop them. I was like, yeah, right. It's just power. They didn't want to get on the wrong side of Dennis Hanlon because they just realized that the amount of headache he would cause. Yeah. And that's the music world we live in. They just take advantage of situations like that. And look where he is now. He's a horrible person everybody hates. And I'm happy to say it. If he's ever listening, I don't care, because he's a horrible person, and I'm still doing it. And I'm still loving what I do. So that's what matters,
Yeah.
But it's definitely unfair, especially when you've got all the documents or everything to prove that it was a legal clearance and they got you on copyright, which I didn't do. It's annoying. Well, now, if you did that now, right, you know what they do? So I'll give you an example now. If you have something that's not clear, and it happens all the time, like a company will use it, a track. They just go, oh, sorry about that. We'll take it down. Didn't realize. They don't fight it. They just go, yeah, sorry about that. Oh, we'll go up that. If there's a problem, we'll pay you. Yeah. They don't make an example of people. It's sort of like, it was a witch hunt, and that's the only way to put it. A medieval witch hunt, and they wanted a head, and they got one. We're seeing it over time in history, where the French did it, everyone's done it. The US had done it. Any whistleblower, they will screw you till you fall apart. People laugh at it and think, oh, it doesn't happen, but it does.
Nah, but you hear about these. I listen to quite a bit of like true crime podcasts, and you often hear of people that were like innocent. They had nothing to do with it. Like, no way. And then they'll have the like pre-court case meeting or whatever, and they'll offer them a plea deal.
Yeah.
And they'll say, I'm not taking a plea deal. I've done nothing wrong. And their lawyer will say, well, look, we've got to prove this in court. And then they go to court and end up going to prison.
Yeah,
and they're totally innocent. And then once you're in prison, to get out and to clear your name is almost impossible. So people take the plea deal, and You're powerless against these.
You're up, and it's
Yeah,
funny when you're in the music business, you don't think of it like that. You don't think that could happen. You just think, people are nice.
yeah,
People are nice because every time in my experience with music, people are all really nice. Everyone's friendly, and everyone's. It's an emotional thing on a good level. That's what music's for, to make people happy, or sad. But in the end, they still get happy from being sad. It's an emotional thing, but they enjoy
yeah,
it. It's enjoyment. You don't expect people to go in there ruthlessly try to screw and take advantage and destroy lives for the sake of it. It's like it's like it wasn't like I was screwing their business or anything. It wasn't like like one shop's you're going to lose your house for it. They weren't going to lose their house just from
yeah,
some little guy like me. All they want to do is take my house.
yeah.
It's not like a fair exchange of, oh, well, you're better than me. It's an equal barrier. It's not. It wasn't an equal, we'll fight until someone disappears. It's not about that. It's just purely of a giant stepping on an ant.
Yeah.
And showing I can step on it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's purely a power play on the worst level. And,
So when was that? Like, what was
that
that
was
in the
in
early
2003, was it?
Oh, so early
3 or 5,
2000s.
2003, yeah. I think 2003 or 5. I can't remember now. It was a period where I try to forget.
So, I mean, after that, like, because we
I'll give you an
DJ'd with
example
you.
of Dennis Hanlon. He was ruthless because my dad, he wanted to buy some property off the church, my father was into the church. And he was ruthless about trying to get the property to get rid of the church off the grounds because it was next door to his house. He's that sort of guy. And I'm happy to tell everybody that. But he's a horrible person. And I have no fear of him now and Sony Music, which I was quite happy to work with, and I'm happy to work with them. But Dennis is terrible, and the culture. And he forced my problem,
Is he still around?
No, he's got. I don't care, but he lost his job, got fired
Yeah.
in disgrace. Disgrace. Checking him, looking him up. Disgrace. He got completely chucked out. There should be criminal charges against him for what he did to his staff as well.
Yeah.
But there's people like that everywhere. But hopefully,
Oh, but is he still around in Australia? Like he's
yeah. Hopefully, no one knows where. But let's hope he dies unhappy. Just for all the pain he's given to everybody else.
yeah.
But I want him to live on in the pain.
But like I was just thinking, you were DJing and touring off these mix CDs after that. So there must have been a period where you just went, oh, look, I'm just going to get back on the
Oh no, I never
horse.
stopped. I never stopped. I only stopped releasing music with these big companies because in those days there weren't the structure like now. You can release easily. You still
Yeah.
had to have a fair bit of money to release stuff. You had to, do a video. You had to have press up vinyl still or CDs. It would still cost a fair bit of money. So
Okay.
I
Yep.
didn't invest in it. Let's put it that way. And I didn't want to deal with a major company again. I was like, what's the point? So at that time, luckily, I'd done the Olympic Games. So I got a lot of work doing production with big events and writing music for events. And I was quite happy because I was like, well, I'm not going to write music for release. I'm just going to write music for shows. They never released. So I did a lot of music, writing music for big production, big shows worldwide. And that was my creative outlet musically. I did a lot of work, and all sorts of music, like World Expo, there's a lot of, I was Chinese New Year music director for Sydney and did a lot of shows for Vivid. There are a few expos worldwide. Asian Games.
Still doing some of that now, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm still doing it. So,
Yeah.
and I did all the fireworks music for a long time. So I was quite happy not to deal with these record companies after that. I was quite, I don't care. I don't need you. I didn't need them. But it didn't stop my DJ work. I just didn't do I didn't release music under my name much in those days. I started doing compilations, like I did a few for what did I do after that?
Central.
Yeah. I did a Central one. I did a few other ones. Yeah, the Ministry was before that, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
I remember them, the
In the
Ministry CDs. Yeah, that were the hard energy ones. Yeah.
yeah, no, the one before that, the gold one. I don't know what it's called. Yeah, but I still put out music like that. I did mixes, but not as many. I did one or two every second year or so. I didn't bother. I was quite happy. I had a lot of gigs, so it didn't worry me.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You DJ,
but
were you doing Sublime,
yeah, I
touring
was
all
still
over
there
the
every week
place?
and still touring. And
Yep.
then that went on for another, 10 years. And I wish I'd got back into music before that, actually. Looking back now, once I started up at COVID, I saw my best mate, Mark, who you interviewed. Um, when he started doing music again with COVID, I went, yeah, that's a good idea. I should just do what I want and put it out. Not just do what I want and then not put it out. I
Yeah.
did a lot of stuff like that. Um, and then that's why we started Two Tribes Records, just to put out what we wanted. But looking back now, I wish I kept it up purely on the Spotify numbers
Yeah.
because suddenly you got all this pre-digital music that never got onto digital. And I should have put it onto digital back then, instead of waiting 20 years to put it on digital. You know what I mean? Because when that happened, when the Spotify thing happened, my music didn't go up on digital for a long time. So there's all this stuff that is still not on digital form platforms. So looking back now, I wish I put that up earlier. I kept the
Yeah.
momentum going. But whatever. I'm still doing it now. But we put out, what are we up to now? I think we're up to nearly 40 releases and a double album in a couple of years. And we sort of put out each about probably about 6 releases each or 7 each, and then mixes. So it's quite a lot of mixes.
Unreal. Yeah.
So I mean, and musically, that's a lot of variety, which is what we are. We don't stick to one thing. We're like the classic 6-hour DJs. We like a bit of everything.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
got to build the night, and it goes up and goes down. There's nothing worse than just starting at 140 and staying there all night long. You got to start at 100 and then work all the way up. Even at a techno venue, just a couple of slow ones at the beginning, just to warm your ears up. So yeah, even now I write music purely for what I like. Like the next release I've got. So the one now is a disco one. The one before that was hard acid house, trance, like energy stuff. So then the last one was disco and house. The next one is drum and bass. So
All over the place.
really soulful drum and bass,
Yeah.
not like rudimental. So I'm that sort of DJ. If I can get that sort of track in there, I'll play it. If it works, there's no rules about what works with what, as long as it works in the mix.
Yeah.
As they say, Martin Garrett's doing a drum and bass track. It's just a big thing now. But so I'm happy with that. All variety is good for everybody, as
Yeah.
long as it's interesting.
Yeah. Good quality, hey. As long
If it
as it's
doesn't
quality.
work, what's that?
As long as it's good quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Some tracks are made to not play at peak time. Some tracks are for that, some aren't. But you can't just go, oh, I'm just going to write this. It's like, it's not who I am. I like music that fits different moods. And, as a DJ, you always get many different moods through the night. It's like.
Do you ever do any all night long gigs, like where you open and to go from
Yeah, I
open to
do.
close, like these days?
I do that these days if it's a private party. Yeah. So if I'm doing a private party, I'll do that. So,
Cool.
yeah, I've been doing quite a few lately because
Every bit of everything, just start
yeah,
slow.
my generation's sort of at that point where they go, well, I wouldn't mind having another party.
Yeah.
I don't get mail as much. And so they get me in and I just build it up through the night, like I did one last week. That was a bit different because they wanted a Sublime set.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They got a Sublime set. But yeah, normally I would build it up. I'd get there and then start slow with a lot of one of my A-lists is called Sweatbox HQ. And that is more jazz influence breaks and drum and bass. And so normally I'd probably start with that because it's funky, something like that. that is my roots realistically. Like I grew up listening to jazz when I was young, before the American thing. My parents were all in jazz. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And I like hip hop.
Yeah.
And, can't go wrong, can you? Hip hop
That's
beats, jazz. But
perfect warm up.
it's warm up stuff. And, I like listening to it. It's not peak period time. But then you play something that I've made for that. But you can. Honestly, I tried to do that for 6 months in COVID, just do hard energy stuff. And my ears couldn't handle it, and the family couldn't handle it. Too noisy, and you start getting, I can't handle this every day. I mean, maybe I could when I was in the 20s.
Yeah, it's like
I used to be able to do that.
just like a jackhammer on your head constantly.
Yeah, it's okay for a couple of days, but then you do it for 3 weeks or 3 months and you go, well, I can't handle this. I need to do something different. So now I end up actually, I got a format now where I write 4 different tracks at once on the same page. I know it sounds weird. So I'll do Ableton and I'll load up a track. This is all on the same arrangement page. And I'll just audition it and move on that. And if it's at the same tempo, I stay at the same tempo. If I don't, I'll just turn the tempo down and go again. And then I'll go back to the other one instantly because it's already up. So I don't worry about loading anything again, because now we've got the technology. I can just have them all loaded at once.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Tracks. So you can have 200 tracks going at once, right? So I'll just do this track. Yeah, that's not working. I'll try the next one. And then I'll fiddle with that for a while. And eventually, if you've got 4 at once, oh, yeah, that one's working better. I'm just going to stick on that one now. I'm going to finish that. And you finish it. And the other 2 you go, or 3 you go, oh, I'll get back to that. And then you don't do it for 6 months. And you go, oh, yeah, what's that track? And then you finish it. Like, that's what I do. And it's a really good structure because for me, I don't get bored. I have a problem. I think that's a DJ thing.
Yeah.
Looking for the next track. Always looking for something new. As a writer, composer, I do the same. I go, it's not me now. Move on to the next one. It's not me now. And that's a really big hurdle to get over because when you're a DJ releasing music, a lot of people are concerned, is this me, the DJ, as the artist? Because if I put out a music that's not me, the DJ, and people are going to think that that's me, the DJ, being the artist, or is it me, the artist, the DJ? And it's a conflicting one. It's like when you get a good example. I had listened to one of your podcasts. Johnny said, Skrillex. He was talking about how Skrillex influenced.
Yeah.
And it's weird when suddenly Skrillex comes out with a house track. I remember when that happened. Oh, why is he becoming a house DJ? And automatically think, is he becoming a house DJ? And he was. But if he put out an ambient thing like Deadmau5, he can't play that in his set, right? He just puts it out. But that's what I like. I like artists and DJs that have the guts to go, okay, well, this is me now doing what I do now for that moment. And that moment is
100%. Yeah.
And it's an ambient track. I can't play it in my set, but I really like it.
Must be a nightmare for the label, though. They're just like, oh, God, what are we going to do with this guy?
Yeah.
Keeps chopping and changing.
It's really hard to promote. How am I going to sell this? Yeah. But you have to have that confidence to go, okay, I'm going to do it anyway because, that's why I got into music. I didn't get into music purely to make a pop hit and make a ton of money. I mean, I'm not saying everybody wants to hit.
Yeah.
But I still just want to do music because I like it, and that's what inspired me in the first place is people doing music that was like, well, I don't know what to do with this, but I really like it. I don't know why. It doesn't fit into anything. I can't really use it anywhere, but I really like it, And there's a lot of the music I always go back to now is that sort of track. I go, well, I could never play this, but I really like it, And you go, why do I like it? And you can never play it in a DJ set. You go, and even if it's dance music, I still could never play it. You still go back to it because you go, I really like that. I don't know why, and
it'll
that's
fit
what
somewhere.
Really is. Yeah, it's a tough one because you just and now kids now growing up, they don't think like that. They think, oh well, if I can't play it, what's the point? if I can't use it now, why?
Yeah.
Why do I need it for tomorrow? It's like, and that whole, I call that cut and paste generation of, use something else that it's already worked and not take a risk.
Yeah, that's why everything sounds the same
It's that way.
these days.
Yeah, I know, and it's a hard one because you're always, as a DJ artist, you always want DJs to play, and they won't play anything that's too outside their
Yeah.
little genre. So it's a toughie. This next one I put out is one of those ones. I'm going, should I put it out? And even the house mix is weird. I went, oh, I'm just going to do something different. It
So
was like,
does Two Tribes have like different sections to it where you'll put the house stuff, the
we were
chilled
going to
stuff?
do that. We thought about doing that, but we have so many different styles. It was hard because it was like, do we really want to just do underground? And then we thought, well, then we've got all this sort of soulful stuff or slow stuff. We need about 10 different genres. And then to market that, it was like, oh, God, how are we going to do that? We need a mega budget for that. So we've got to promote a whole different genres all the way along. But then you need a lot of releases. I think if we had the more releases every week, if you had 4 releases every week, you'd probably do that. We're not big enough yet, I don't think. But I think that would be easier, like different styles. But the problem is, like this next one, I've got 5 different styles on the track. So, and that doesn't include what Mark's put out before, the one before that. That's got another different genres.
Yeah.
So you end up, now there's so many genres on Beatport, you get into many different genres now. Like, it's crazy. It really is. And because you can't tell them, oh, this is a disco track. They will just put it into indie house. I don't know why. They obviously, the people behind it don't know the history of music, in my opinion. I don't know, I'm going to guess in here. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Like my new one that's come out, it's purely new disco, without a doubt. It's new disco or pop dance because it's got a vocal. So it's a popular vocal. But the music is new disco. Yet they put it in indie dance. I don't know. I couldn't figure that out. Even Sergeant Slick was saying the same thing about his new one. That he's got that baby, Groove Baby, I think. He said the same thing. He said, it's definitely new disco. Why is it in indie house? It's not indie house. And it's the only thing I can think of is these DJs that get these jobs in these companies have no experience, or they have little experience or the wrong experience. Maybe they consider a vocal indie. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, Purple Disco Machine is not indie house. You know what I mean? Just new disco, right?
Yeah.
Get it.
Strange. Oh, I mean, I don't go. I still buy vinyl. I'm like mad, passionate vinyl junkie. But so I haven't even been on Beatport for, I reckon, over a year. But the last time I checked it, I didn't get half the genres of, all these different weird house subgenres, and I was like, oh God. It'd be a nightmare being a DJ now because like you got to sift through so much of that stuff. Like I just don't know how you do it.
It's incredible. And that is half the battle. As a DJ, a working DJ, the battle is trying to listen because it's like everybody I know, they're always, 500 to 1,000 tracks behind in promo. They're going, I can't even keep up with it, and that's been forced to do it because they'll say, oh, well, if you don't do the feedback, you get chucked off.
Taken off the list.
Yeah. And even when you do it, you're still 600 behind. You go, how am I going to catch up? I just go, literally you need, just to do 600, that's like, 2 or 3 weeks to get through it, because you got to click and it's not that far. It's quite hard. It's quite long time to go through it all. It's not just listening. It's just clicking as well. Click. And throwing it up. So, yeah, it's an interesting one of where it's going. And I hate to say it, that if the more people who are deciding what genres and what's good and bad in these companies that have not much knowledge of music, the more chance of AI is going to take over because they have no taste, right?
Yeah.
And if you have no taste, it's going to be determined by what's popular. And AI was what popular. You're never going to break the mold of, is this good because it's different, or is it just bad? They won't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So AI would just make it sound like everything else. So it won't ever progress. It's like it's a cycle, it's a loop cycle in a bad way, not in a good way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, when High State of Consciousness came out, right? You'd probably go that Winx track. You'd probably go, oh, no one's going to buy this. The same thing. The AI wouldn't have done that then, right? If you had it now, you go, that's never going to work. It's going to play that. It's too long. It's too slow. It slows down the middle. It's too noisy. It hurts my ears. No, it's going to break sound systems. It's going to destroy our ears. It won't get through the algorithm anymore, because the algorithm say you can't destroy kids' ears. Oh, it'll just block that off.
It's
It can't
sad,
be,
eh?
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see what happens, in the future. But
Sorry, man. But just before we
yeah, let's
wrap
keep.
up, there's just a couple of things I wanted to cover. You've got the Two Tribes Festival coming up. You're playing
Yep.
back to back with Mark. What
Yep.
style will you guys play
We're
there?
going to do classics.
Okay. What
Well, we've got,
classics from which 90s?
don't know yet.
Don't know. Oh,
um,
okay.
I presume we're going to build it up because it's quite early in the day. I think it's like 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So it's pretty early. I think we're just going to do a pretty much classic house, I'd imagine. Maybe early trance stuff, which is now considered house music. But who knows? Because we don't want to push the tempo up because we got other people after us, and there's no
Yeah.
point killing, burning people's legs until they come on. So I presume we're going to be a bit more classic house, I'd imagine. I could be wrong, but that's what I would say. Um,
Cool.
but that could mean a few different things, We probably played Winx, who knows? But I think that's what Mark wants to do. I think that's what he told me. But that could mean classic trance, and it's quite slow. So the early stuff
Yeah.
was all 1:30. So
Bit of
I
like
presume we might
progressive
do
sort of
that.
stuff. Yeah.
What's that?
Bit of progressive stuff, sort of.
Yeah, a bit of aggressive stuff. Exactly. Well, they call that trance now, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah, mate. And the other thing, my old DJ partner Greg will kill me if I miss this part, so I've got to remember to do it. But your track Genesis was such a huge anthem. That's
Yeah,
we're talking early 2000s there. I
yeah,
mean, everyone was playing that from like Judge Jules to Paul Van Dyke.
yeah.
Like, can you remember much about making it and yeah, like how did that sort of blow up so quickly?
Well, it's still going, that one. I mean, I still play it, and everybody really. It actually has got better and better and better because it sounds more current than
Yeah,
what
well,
it
there'd
did.
be lots of the young DJs are playing it now. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
and so I think. I mean, at that period, I had a studio in Darlinghurst, and I was doing a lot of music, and it was all pretty much. I was really influenced by that period, early Baby Doc, going into that period, not at that time, but before that. So I'd already really got into. I was mega fan of Philip Glass, so I've always loved the arpeggio, and so the arpeggio thing, which is obviously a trance thing, it was not originally a trance thing. Obviously, the Georgian Moroder used it, but it was also a classical thing. With a pianist, we used to do it. So I was always still a big fan of arpeggios. Didn't matter what style. So musically, I've always led to that direction. Arpeggios, and I still use it a lot. And for that one, I think it was just purely. I think I was very much influenced by what I was playing at the time. Because it was that tempo. I think that was one of those jobs I was like going, not a job, but a period where I was trying to make something for me to play,
Yeah.
out with
Okay.
everything else.
Yep.
And I think that's why musically it's probably been influenced by, the Baby Doc, because I always like that sort of in between techno, rave, and house. It was sort of that period between that 96 and 99. I didn't really want to go too hard, but I didn't want to lose. I still wanted to have a house element, even though it doesn't sound like one. it has that sort of chord progression like a house track, rather than just a monotonous trance thing.
Yeah.
So I like the chord progression. So I've always, a lot of times in those days, I used to just sit there and just do the arpeggio with the chords, and that's probably where it came from, or the stab, and that's where the riff came from. Probably one night I was just going, oh, that works. One of those. That's generally how it works. You just sit there, oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, okay, that's it. And it's that simple. Because but at the time I was writing the album. So you got to remember, I just finished the album, so I was writing a lot of that sort of music before that. So it was one of those off the back of the album. I think it was a melody that I had off the album I'd never used, and then it just kicked in. It got better. I must have had a bad chord or something. Never used it, and then I went, oh, that works. Had the first two bit, and then that works now. I'm a big fan of chords that have a slight turnaround with a weird change. It's just a slight on a chord, not like. So the only way to describe it to people now is if when you buy a keyboard, a new one, they'll have pads in there where you can play the chords on a pad. So you can put in a key and you can play any chord you want in that key, right? All right. So that way, a lot of trance stuff now, they'll have a controller that has every chord possible in key of E, right? So they just go bing, bing, bing from each chord, bang, bang, and they'll get a melody, right? But what it doesn't do, it doesn't do you the slight turnaround or like the jazz chord where it's a bit odd. And that, to me, is what makes good music. It's that turnaround of something weird. It sort of gives you a bit of tension. And a good melody is one that you go, oh, that's an interesting chord. And your ears twitch up. You go, oh, and then it goes back. Where a lot of pop music now, I found that period where I was talking about where it got boring between 2004 to 20, really, until COVID, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chord progressions they were playing too safe. They were like, you would never go on the outside, like a jazz the outside, like if you listen to the old jazz stuff, they were on the outside of the chord. And I like tracks that have a little bit of that. And if you listen to Philip Glass, all the melody lines, they're always one chord, and you go, oh, wow, what is that? It doesn't really, it nearly clashes. And
Yeah.
you go,
Okay.
oh, that works. And it just holds you to your tone in your head. And I like writing like that. That's, for me, that's interesting. That something that nearly shouldn't work, but it does work. And it's good for people with trained ears that go, or musical ears, not trained musically, people that listen to music. And when they hear jazz is a good example because you can hear that it's nearly out of tune, and it is. And you go, but it just holds it. And it's interesting. And that's what music is all about. And a lot of Middle Eastern music does that, and Indian music does that. And you go, that's really interesting. You go, it's only more popular music now because people are using machines. They keep it all in key. And that's bad for me. I don't like that. If it's too nice and too much in tune, I get really bored. I like a little bit of tension.
Yeah.
In anything. And that's why people like analog, because
exactly.
it's always a little bit out of tune. And I think that's the secret.
Jenny was saying that. She was saying it needs the human element to it.
Yeah.
Everything today is like so bland and robotic.
Yeah. And sure, pop music, it works being pristine and clear, and obvious. And it's not easy to write that either. I'm not saying it's hard or not harder. They're both just as hard. It's what you like, really. It comes down to taste. But I think as far as something adventurous and more avant-garde, keys are the key. It's a funny one. Where, popular music, it's very much everything in tune, ding, 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 everything in tune. There's nothing out. Everything's processed in tune. And I've actually been playing that a lot with that AI, trying to make it go out of tune. And it actually does it in a weird way. And it's actually interesting. It's good doing that. I'm trying to get these things to do something odd.
Yeah.
But it's still not very good for me. But how to make music doesn't really matter. It's what you get out of it. Doing the same thing over and over, it's pretty boring. And it's still, you have to have the mind to go, tell you that's good. You need these people, or not algorithms, people
Yeah.
that will always go outside the box, outside the machine, outside the algorithm, go, that's good. I don't know why, but that's good. You don't know why. And I'm sure you could explain it somehow, but whether that would make sense to you individually, I don't think so. Everyone's an individual, you
Isn't
know.
that like so true though? Because you can have a track that you could have at home playing it, go, oh man, this is going to be absolutely rocking. And then you play it in a club and it just doesn't seem to have that same kind of impact. And then you'll play something that you don't think is that good. And then it all of a sudden just like kind of has that huge impact. And you think sometimes it's just hard to know what is going to have that massive impact.
A lot of it now, I found it's really determined by the sound systems as well. Like I found if you have a really modern system, it changes the way you play a lot. Because some things sound really good on it, some things don't. And bars
Really?
everywhere you go is the same problem. Some things really work on it, and some don't. And that only affects DJs that are playing off a crowd. When you've got an artist playing a set, they're not really playing for a crowd. They're just playing a
Yeah.
set. But if you're playing with a crowd in mind, you play one thing and it'll go, this sounds really good because of the frequencies in that room. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, like for example, some rooms you play drum and bass and it sounds terrible. And then suddenly you play it in a small boxy room and it sounds really good. Uh, you know, a big room like Sublime, that was so popular. That room allowed for that sort of sound, big air, big pound, and you have the space for the sounds to take over. But you play that in a small room, it never sounded as good.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, yeah, there is an attitude where you write something for a room. It's going to work on a room. When I do like stadium shows, yeah, you end up writing for the show a bit. For the Olympics, it's going to be, for an outdoor thing or an indoor thing or at
Big
night.
sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you end up writing there a little bit differently for that. Like if it's an outdoor with a band, you got to have a bit more live sounding because it sounds better, with the drums. And if it's in a sort of good example would be something like Dead Mouse, for example. It doesn't sound real good until you put it on a really big system.
Yeah.
And it sounds awesome. But if
Yeah.
you play
Yeah.
it on a small system and it just clicks away, doesn't you can't define the sounds as much. But then you put on a big system, it sounds really good. You go, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's really good.
Massive. Yeah.
Yeah, because and it doesn't. Some systems work with it, some don't. But that's with all music. I found, anything that's too percussive on sound system sounds awful. You go, oh, it doesn't work there. It's too loud. But it does depend on the EQ of a system and the compression, big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a hard one. That one, it
Yeah.
really is, and that's why DJs are different because some DJs only play bars and some people only play here. And so, oh, that works in that club. That's a garage style club, that one. It's got a really good bass. I'm just going to play that there. I think that's probably why the Sydney sound was bigger with the house stuff because all the big venues had the same similar sound system because it was big. Where in Europe, they didn't have that. So musically, we were in this direction because we had big audiences. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah. Yep.
if you look at the history of Studio 54 and those sort of places, they had pretty good sound systems, right? All the old what they had big bottom ends and stuff. So the music, they would write to that as well. For example, when that Don't Stop, Michael or the Quincy Jones stuff came out on a disco system, it sounded awesome. And everyone, oh, I've got to have that. I've got to have that layer of percussion, the depth, because they had the sound system to hear it. Where now they know they don't need to do it. They can compress it. So they don't write like that anymore. You know what I mean? And you can hear it with the Quincy stuff.
Yeah.
He knows it's going to be, really clean and loud. So they're going to EQ it that way. Where some people just don't need to. They just want to turn up one sound, like the EDM sound. One sound only at once. One sound. Because you're not going to hear the background. You can hear the reverb, but you're not going to hear another sound in there, right? It's too much. So they change up, because they know the sound system. But
So, like
I
you've
don't
been,
think distinctly. I think people just do it by accident, and then they realize, oh, that worked. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like you've been making music for so long now. Like, do
Yeah.
you do your own mastering and that, or you
Yeah, I do everything.
just do start to
I do
finish?
everything. Yeah. I mean, on a couple of levels, I do it because it's cheaper.
Yeah, it's expensive the mastering. Hey, I didn't realize it. Talking to a producer, mate, it's like it can be like $500.
Yeah, I mean, unless you, especially when you put a lot of music out, it's okay if you're doing one every 6 months, not a problem. But when you're doing a lot of music, think about it. If I put out two
Jeez.
tracks a month, that's 8 mixes. You're talking $4,000 just on mastering, just there. So why would I do that? I couldn't afford it. They wouldn't make. There's no return.
Yeah,
There's no money in that. The money in it, music is hard anyway. So you have to cut costs. There's no return. So you have to end up doing everything. It's the only way you can release it. Otherwise, you're in the red the whole time. You're
yeah,
basically you're not giving the music away. You're losing money. So you can't keep doing that forever. You have to, just surviving is hard because there's no money in it. It's just purely the way the music business is. That's why people do live gigs.
yeah. You
You
got
know,
to get some money. Yeah,
well, it's not being ruthless. It's just being trying spending the time. You can't. You got to basically support your life as well a little bit.
yeah,
You
for
don't expect an
sure.
artist to. There's no such thing like the Middle Ages where they had the sponsored Medici family sponsoring Leonardo so he could paint. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
How do artists do that now? They do 3 jobs.
Yeah, mate. Like this whole streaming. I mean, it's the future, so if it's just the way it is. But the streaming, the way the streaming thing works for artists,
Yeah,
that's criminal.
it's
That's
criminal.
actually criminal.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I wish that never had happened, but people were stupid. The companies were idiots for let them get away with that.
Yeah,
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 back then, I don't know why they didn't think and look at the future to not allow that to happen. The publishing companies, I don't know why they didn't see this coming and let them take such a small percentage. It's not fair on the artist,
yeah.
full stop. You know, they make what's he worth now? The head of Spotify, 8 billion or 20 billion or something.
Oh, I
What
don't
is it
know,
worth?
but it's just
300?
like I saw an interview with Snoop Dogg, and he was saying, "Oh, he got 1 billion streams on something and made about like 40,000 American dollars out of it." He's like, "Who's getting the money?"
Exactly. Where's the money going? Exactly.
Yeah, it's just it's something's got to change. Like it has to.
I think something will come up eventually because, like anything, everything is always a reaction to things that change. They've been pretty good now, putting the fear into people's head that you can't do that, But I think people are getting so wise to it. Eventually, it will turn around. Whether it happened with vinyl, it happened with CDs, it happened with digital, But everyone's a bit complacent about everything at the moment, really, when
Yeah,
you look at it.
that's what I was going to say. It's like the labels always seem to miss that first wave, like with all the vinyl labels that missed when the transition to digital happened. And then
Yeah,
all the major labels missed when the transition went to streaming.
yeah.
They're always like a little bit behind. It's sort of frustrating.
Well, they know they don't. It's like anything. Nobody wants to take a cut. I mean, sorry, drop their cut. So with the streaming game, they're going, well, why do we want to do that? We're only going to make 0.00. We can make more money off the CD. Why do we want allow this to happen? And so
Yeah.
they get all high horsey. Oh, we're not going to do that. We can control the market. You know,
Yeah.
and the clubs are the same. They all think
Yep.
they can do it forever as well. But eventually, it might take a while. Things turn around and things change, but hasn't for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe one day. Probably not in our lifetime, maybe.
Yeah. Probably not.
No,
Oh, this has been unreal, Pee Wee.
no, good.
I'm, I'm such a music nerd. I could just sit and listen to you just talk and talk and talk. But for the people listening, we
Yeah,
probably
they'll
should
probably get
wrap it
bored of
up.
this one.
Yeah.
I'm talking too much.
So, mate, you got the Two Tribes Festival. Any other
Yep.
big like club gigs that you got planned in the
We're
future?
doing a really big Sublime one in October in a month. Month. That's really big. That'll be big. I've got a lot of gigs coming up, disco gigs coming up for my Pippi Louie alias. So I've got 3 or 4 of those coming up next month, and then Obviously, I've got a new single out, another one out in a couple of weeks, that drum and bass one, which should be interesting. I haven't actually put out a drum and bass track under my name before.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so it'd be interesting. Something different for me.
Cool.
I don't know. Who knows?
You might
It's
be
a
the
nice
next
Spotify track. Let's put it that way.
you might be the next Australian groove rider.
Yeah, you never know. Well, as Cruise Rider says, those guys says, I wish I'd played techno when the techno thing hit and didn't stay
Yeah,
drum and bass.
I
Now drum
saw
and
that
bass is back.
podcast.
They're probably
Yeah,
happy
yeah.
with it. They're 20 years in between though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's
You got to try these things.
yeah, gotta have a crack. Put it out
Absolutely.
there.
All right. Anything else?
Awesome. No, mate,
You've got too much info now.
that was unreal.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, I'm glad that you spoke about the early days a lot because the that's the whole reason I started this podcast because the early days of Australian music never seems to get enough of a shout. Do you know what I mean? Like the UK and America, they've got loads of these music podcasts, but there's nothing really in Australia to sort of
Yeah,
tell
exactly.
everyone about the history. It frustrates me.
Exactly. People forget very quickly.
Yeah. And there's
Um,
before social media, there's barely any footage. Is there
I mean, a
actually
good
is there
example is people think, the rave scene, started with the English. They really believe it. And you can look back on the internet and all the magazines, it'll tell you that too, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
realistically, for example, the rave scene in Sydney, even though the word rave wasn't used, but I put it back to what the Sydney party scene were doing rave style gigs that weren't called raves. So
Yeah.
they were called parties. And even the first raves that started weren't called raves, they were called parties. So to me, there was no difference between that and when the rave started. Technically, it's just that the flyers started to say rave on
Yeah.
the actual label. But the very first couple of raves didn't say rave on it. It was just they were run by English people. They
Yeah.
were English people came over here, couldn't afford to go to the Hordern Pavilion. Like literally, they couldn't get a gig at a big party, or they couldn't afford it. So they put on smaller parties on the same night as a big one, and they would get 300 people. We'd get 5,000, and then they would say that was the beginning of rave because it was an anti-reaction to the mainstream. It was big,
Yeah.
and that's where they call the history of rave in Sydney especially started, but it didn't. It started before that in the warehouses doing these sort of mixed gay parties that were already raves. They just weren't called that. They were just called dance parties, and that's so it is only determined by a label, not determined by what actually was, and people don't talk about that because all they do is look on the internet and they go, oh, the Sydney rave history of raves only started in 91, but it actually didn't. It started, I mean, I was playing all Frank DeWolf and R&S, right, at the Hordern Pavilion before that. So you tell me, is that the beginning of rave or is it a rave because it's Englishmen promoted it? I don't know.
Is there
I
any
would say it
footage?
started before that. I would say it started when I was playing the Hordern, to tell you the truth, because that's when the music started to become stab and acid house I would call rave earlier than 80s,
Yeah.
early 80s. That's what I would call it.
Is there any footage online of those like Hordern Pavilion gigs that you
Any
know
videos
of?
of it?
Yeah, like is there much footage of those
Not
days?
not a real lot. They did an exhibition in the museum, the Powerhouse, and they showed a fair bit of that, but not good quality. But there is a bit, but not lots of photos, not lots of good DJ shots like for us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because you got to remember where the DJs were there, but for some reason the videos were of the everything, because there was a maze, there was a lot of decoration, so they really decked out the place, and it was all in one. It wasn't just this is the DJ. It was everything was
Yeah.
one. Like the people, the DJ,
Right into their dancing and all that. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, oh, we got a DJ on, and that really because they had a bigger budget. They could do that. Where when you have a small budget, and like we did underground raves, well, they weren't called raves then; they're called dance parties. Same thing, 300 people, right? where they have a couple of spots, white lights with a strobe, but they weren't called raves then. But that to me was what
The
I would,
start of it. Yeah.
that would be the definition of a rave because it was small in a warehouse, right? But when you go to a Hordern, people started to think that wasn't a rave because it was in a bigger venue, or for he did a couple of the City Entertainment Exhibition Centre, they were 10, 12,000 people, right? They were really big inside. And that was in, 1990. We're still playing the same music as what we played in the raves. So I don't know.
10,000 people.
It's a weird concept. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It only became a rave because suddenly England went back. Someone had different culture with clothes. The clothes started to change. Instead of it being more shiny, like the disco period, shiny, chromy look, where people go out and look more chrome and glitter. The raves weren't glitter. They were more the colourful, baggy. And that's where the culture changed look-wise. But musically, it didn't really change at all. I mean, the Balearic sound, which is pretty much a rave thing as well, even it wasn't called a rave either, even though it was the same people. I don't know. It's a funny one. And that, to me, that's where the media and the marketing of branding started to warp the history of what happened. It was like, it's a weird one. English like to take control of everything in those days. We always had a thing going on in Sydney in those days. There was too many Pommies in Sydney. It really was. There was a lot because they all hated England.
Yeah. They're all in Sydney, backpacking in Sydney, weren't they?
When they came to Sydney, found that the Hordern Pavilion and all the big parties. They went, this is the place. And suddenly some would go back and then more would come back and then they didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
And then so they decided, someone wrote in a magazine, the raves are happening in England now in the 90s. And they would say, we'll bring them back here. I was like, what do you mean? We've been doing it for 10 years.
and most of them English people have just stayed anyway.
I know.
It's permanent.
But it was a marketing ploy. Because we'll get our English mates to come along because they went to a rave in England. So, we're in Sydney. Oh, yeah, it's a rave. So it was purely a marketing thing. Suddenly became a culture thing. It's weird, it's like
pretty clever.
It's funny, like the Acid House, the Summer of Love, which was at 87 in Sydney, didn't happen in Hacienda till that same period in Hacienda. But they were already doing, Hacienda was the biggest thing in Europe, and that was 800 people max.
Yeah.
We were doing 5,000 at the time. So, and when Mike and Graham Park came out here for Hacienda, they were gobsmacked about what's going on here. This is crazy.
Enormous. Yeah.
Enormous. And they were like, then they went, well, this is really happening in Sydney, and that says it all. Because we didn't know either. Back then, we had no idea because you couldn't tell.
No internet.
No internet. I mean, there was online just started, but it was no internet. But a lot of the flight attendants would come and tell you, because they were traveling, they would go to New York and wherever. They would always, I can York for a few of them, they'd always bring back mixtapes for me from New York because that was the hip hop capital. So I always liked the hip hop tapes. So can you give me a hip hop tape? While you're there, record the radio because we couldn't get them. And so they'd bring me back and they'd tell me about it. And they'd say, yeah, there's still discos, but they're not really that big, There's block parties, but not really that big. And the London people would say the same. The only place was big besides Sydney was the Mardi Gras in Buenos Aires, but that was only for 1 week. There was a big festival for that.
Yeah, you were doing it every week.
That was it. And Sydney was just, cranky. It really was. So we didn't really, at the time, we just thought that was Sydney. Oh, yeah, this is Sydney. We're lucky. We didn't know how lucky we were at the time. We just thought that was just part of life here. Go to Oxford Street, or City.
Yeah.
It's happening. We're pretty lucky to have that because they don't have that anymore.
I interviewed Noel from Vision 45, and he said the exactly the same thing. He said that it was blowing up here before it blew up in the UK and that, but it just doesn't. It's not heard about. No one talks about it.
No, the only thing we didn't do. Like, we weren't at the forefront of releasing the music. Like, when I first put out Colette, that blew up big time, but that was pop. But we used the same, basically the same formula of what Cole Cop was doing in London musically. But we weren't on the forefront of directing what was being written. We just took from everywhere. We were like the sponge of the world. We grabbed the best of everything around the world. Where Europe didn't grab everything, and London only grabbed what they wanted. We didn't care less. We grab America, we grab Europe, and we grab Asia. Anything, didn't matter where it came from. We didn't have any problems. Where England were like, oh, do we really want to, get behind Italian stuff? It was like they were a bit uptight about that sort of stuff. They had to read about an enemy or music making, melody, music. They were really caught up in that whole reviewer, where we didn't really care. We would look at it as DJs. I would, see what was on the charts. But
So that's
I would
cool.
also
I'm
look at
playing
the
that.
charts in America as well, and the charts everywhere, and go, oh yeah, what's that one? Where I don't think they did that as much because we felt so isolated. It's like anything. When you feel isolated, you look harder. And
True.
it happens here in Australia when Brisbane felt like they were secondary to Sydney, which they did for a long time. They tried harder and wrote more music. You know what I mean? And so you got people writing music up there because for that reason they felt isolated. They try harder, going, oh yeah, we can do it too. And you find even now, bad places that feel isolated try harder. When you think you've got it all, what do you need it? We got it all. We don't really need another one. So it does have a big factor on what is written. And I don't think we needed to. I only just got involved because I like production. And, suddenly we went, oh, well, we can do it too, but we didn't need it. We just wanted to do it. It wasn't like we had enough outlets to get stuff just on a small level. So, and we didn't have any magazines though. We only had Stiletto and 3D a bit later. So that was the music. That was a fashion magazine, music with a bit of music in it. So it certainly has a big influence though.
Mate, one more thing just kind of popped into my head. Like you've got so much experience from the music industry, from the obviously the highs and the lows of it. What advice would you give to someone who, say there's like a young DJ or a young producer who's listening or watching this? I mean, it's a minefield out there, but what advice would you give to someone starting out now?
I think everyone says the same thing now. Just do what you feel like you should do. Be adventurous. Good and bad, but you got to take a risk. You got to have confidence, and this is what I like, whether everyone hates it or not. This is what I like, and go with it. Because you might be on a good thing. If you feel it feels good, maybe it is good. But if people bag you out for it, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that they don't understand it. So you have to be confident that this is what you like. I mean, I got bagged for playing, all the Latin Rascals and all the electro stuff for a long time. At the beginning, people went, "Can you play something soulful? Can you play something without a drum machine? And I said, no, I like it.
That's what I'm into.
I'm going to play Planet Rock over and over and over. I like it. I still play it, but they didn't understand it because of the change. But now, the changes don't come as fast now. So it's not that simple, where it was easy back then to change because there was a lot of new music coming out. It was different. Where now it's a tough one. So you can't actually go out there with a change. The only way you can do that realistically now is to be someone writing the music. I don't think it's possible to find music that's different without really finding a niche thing that's already been done before, because there's so many people have done it, right? There's a million DJs doing it. If you write your own music that's really different, not talking just a little bit different, you're going to stand out, good and bad. If it's good, you'll take it. If not, you'll bomb, but you have to take a risk. But it's got to be really different. If if you're just doing what everyone else is doing, you got to have some sort of skill beyond that. You know, when you got to be really good mixer or do something really credible, something really good, you know, popular. Either you have a mega hit or you do something crazy that's really different. One or the other. I don't think just being a normal DJ, you're going to get noticed anymore. There's so many. Do you? I
Yeah.
don't.
No. Like you think the name that popped into my head when you were saying that was like Fred again or James Hype. You know, they're doing something different with the equipment.
Yeah. But everyone's doing that. They just, you know, I mean, like everyone will tell you, every manager will say, well, you got to have a big presence online, you know, social presence. Yeah, you'll get gigs that way, but will it last if you're not different?
Yeah.
You know, sure, you might get your mean hits, but if you're that boring and people like you because you're an idiot, like a clown, you might get popular and get a couple of gigs. But will you be there next year?
Yeah. Your longevity.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people getting influencers that do that, but are they going to be around in a year or two? You know, are they going to still be here doing it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought so. I think the whole influencer, people get really sick really quickly of the same thing. And I mean, look at, I'm just trying to think of a good example of that. I forgot his name. Oh, I've seen a lot of them.
Yeah.
They're really interesting. And then you see it 10 times and they're creative and pretty good. But okay, well, I'll move on to something. Give me something else. You know, they're scared to push outside that circle and go, oh, okay, well, this is me now today. I'm going to try something really radically today. You need that risk factor, not necessarily hurting someone, which is what people like now. You know, they want to watch someone can survive, you know, jump off a 10-story building. You know, that's what they watch, right? You know, oh wow, he survived. But I mean, after watching 10 of those, right, in 2 week period, by the 12th that comes along, you know, I've seen that before. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, like when you watch
so true.
a bike rider going down a mountain.
Desensitized.
You know, oh, that's really cool going down the mountain. But after a couple of them, you're going, yeah, okay, all right, I've seen that. You know, it's like it's always, if you really, from a music point of view, you really got to have something beyond that. And I suppose the only thing left really is you've got to have something that has some emotion that affects you somehow, whatever that is. You know, there can be many things doing that. If from a music point of view, I don't know what that is, but I'm not there saying everything should be negative and bad and depressing. It could be anything. Could be just weird emotion. You know, I don't know. If I knew, I would.
Yeah, no one does. It's just always interesting hearing everyone's perspective of, you know, what would they do. But like when I spoke to Tall Paul, he said, mate, I'll just keep making records and one of them will hit.
That's exactly right.
And it's like, it's just a game of numbers, hey?
It is the game. But then again, you have to be prepared to lose the whole time. Yeah. If you're not prepared to lose, you just give up before you even start because you're going to lose for a while.
Yeah.
You know, and even when you win, you're going to lose after that. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
But you got to be confident that it's like you know, I'm watching the bike racing. You know, I like my bike racing. As they say, pro bike rider. Most of the time, you lose. 90%, 99%. But most people don't get any credit. They lose and they get pounded and never win. But they don't do it for that. They do it because they love riding, you know?
Yeah.
So you have to have the same attitude with music. You have to go in there thinking, I just like what I like, and hopefully someone will come along for the ride. It's that simple, you know? It's a toughie.
Spot on.
What's it?
I said that's spot on. It's so true. Unreal. Oh, well, I've got to say thanks again, Peewee. Bloody legend.
Yeah.
I'm considering coming down for that festival in Melbourne, so I might even catch up with you. Yeah.
Well, Mark knows how to put a party on, so it'll be good.
Exactly, man. If he's involved, it's going to be bloody good.
Absolutely. He'll have a VIP. It'll be easy going. It won't be a hard one. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, come on down for that.
Good stuff. Oh, thanks, mate. We'll wrap it up there.
Yeah, absolutely.